Chapter 161. A 5,000-word chapter. There are 2 chapters left today. Asking for monthly votes, attack against attack. For the entire Dark World, Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, was also famous, but in fact he was extremely low-key and mysterious. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State was unparalleled. The hidden god of Zhongzhou State stood aloof from worldly affairs. But when it came to the god of war of Zhongzhou State, people could only think of 4 words. Unfathomable. Compared with Li Honghe, the war god of the previous generation in Zhongzhou State, Gu Xingyun also liked to make arrangements. However, the former's vision was extremely broad. Every chess piece on the chessboard was aboveboard and upright, which was a real overt plot. Many of his chess pieces were also extremely obscure, but the moment the chess pieces were revealed, they revealed a kind of unstoppable strength and magnanimity. Gu Xingyun focused more on conspiracies. Over the past 20 years, Zhongzhou State seemed to be peaceful, but undercurrents had been surging inside. The god of war of Zhongzhou State, the only one who was not from Zhuanyuantai in hundreds of years, guarded the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, but he rarely took action. Or it could be said that he rarely took action in public. He was secretive and straightforward, and he was best at conspiring with a tiger. When he appeared in front of everyone, he always seemed to wear a conspirator's mask. He looked elegant and gentle, but in fact, he was a real hero and unpredictable. In the past many years, Gu Xingyun gave people the feeling of a businessman. Cooperation and trade, killing and betrayal, glory and desolation, ups and downs, right and wrong, good and evil. He rarely took action. But for many years, Kunlun City would quietly participate in every major event in the Dark World. Thunder could be heard in silence, and flowers could be seen in colorless places. In many things that seemed to develop naturally, the forces of Kunlun City, which no one would pay special attention to, suddenly became the most critical role. The god of war of Zhongzhou State ranked 4th on the world divine list, but most of the time, he always showed people the deepest schemes and shrewdness. Gu Xingyun's strength was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. However, very few people were able to see just how terrifying it was. For many years, today seemed to be the first time that Gu Xingyun took action in front of people, and he did his best. This was Gu Xingyun, who was extremely strange to everyone. Fierce and powerful, it seemed to carry the sharpness of the heavens and the earth. Every single move he made was filled with an unbelievably wild offensive and oppressive feeling. Triple kill. His whole body seemed to have turned into a sharp sword, approaching the master of Samsara Palace in an instant. The strong airflow gathered around him crazily. The snow-white and cold sky was completely torn apart in an instant. The sword intent roared and condensed again, and he had already appeared in front of the master of Samsara Palace. For ultimate return to origin. The airflow surged. On the high platform, the surrounding air suddenly shook. Dust flew up, and the entire high platform suddenly exploded. Countless stones flew up for a moment, and then disappeared in an instant, directly turning into the most primitive nothingness. The battlefield instantly became blurry. Zhuanyuantai had the strongest sword. Kunlun City had the strongest domain. And the Wang family of Beihai had the strongest outbreak. There were 10 styles in the 10 skills of true martial arts, the world-shaking unique technique of Kunlun City. The 8th and 9th styles were the core domain of Kunlun City. The area within a radius of 100 meters instantly turned into a void. This was the symbol of an invincible realm expert. But when Gu Xingyun's strength reached such a level, as long as he wanted, his every move could be surrounded by the void. Oh, it's wonderful. Is he desperate so soon? The high platform had completely disappeared. Under the effect of 4 moves to 1, the void continued to spread around. In an instant, it broke through the range of 100 meters and kept expanding. In the domain, the master of Samsara Palace, holding the sword with one hand, suddenly froze for a moment. Dozens of spectators had all stood up subconsciously. At the forefront of the crowd, Yi Wuji squinted and stared at the blurry scene in front of him, whispering to himself, "Teacher, the master of Samsara Palace will lose?" Feng stood beside Yi Wuji and asked in a low voice. He lowered his head to hide the indescribable passion in his eyes, and subconsciously glanced around. The goddess Qin, whom he had dreamed of tasting, was not here. At such an important moment, he did not know what she was planning behind the scenes. In recent years, this seemed to be the mode that Samsara was best at. The palace master with matchless combat strength was in charge of fighting, and Qin Weibai was in charge of operation. On such an important occasion, she did not show up, which had already aroused everyone's vigilance and uneasiness. But for Feng, there was only regret. The first beauty of Zhongzhou State. He really did not know what kind of peerless beauty she was. Lose. Yi Wuji did not look at the proudest student beside him. He shook his head and said in a complicated tone, with strong surprise and fear, "Maybe you don't know the meaning of the sword stroke of the master of Samsara Palace just now. That sword stroke belongs to a set of unique skills called 24 moves of sword. It was the core inheritance of the former war god family of Zhongzhou State, and also the unique skill that made them invincible in the dark world for hundreds of years." The corner of his mouth trembled. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "That is the strongest sword intent. The true meaning is to break everything." Everything? Feng was a little confused. Everything. Tianhai Wuji looked serious. Including the void of the invincible realm. Feng opened his mouth, but before he could continue to ask, in the blurry air, the blazing sword light filled the whole field in the blink of an eye. On the training ground, where the coldness had not yet dissipated, the heat wave hit people. In the domain that should not have any matter, a flame burst out completely, as if burning the void. The seventh swordsman, summer solstice. Behind Gu Xingyun, the broken ice chips began to burn in an instant. The sword intent changed to extreme, and the orange flame swept the battlefield. In the blink of an eye, the snowy sky curtain torn by Gu Xingyun disappeared. Suddenly, a torrent of several hundred meters long appeared between heaven and earth, traversing the heavens. The torrent surged violently, just like boiling magma. The master of Samsara Palace waved her sword. A large amount of magma flowed in the air like a long river. From top to bottom, it went straight into the domain that Gu Xingyun had spread out for hundreds of meters. The twisted and blurry domain began to expand directly, and the magma flowed wantonly with the sword light. The master of Samsara Palace and Gu Xingyun rushed together. The sword light that seemed to be about to fly out of the whole world became brighter and brighter. Their bodies seemed to have completely disappeared. The domain full of sword light and magma kept shrinking and expanding. Several invincible realm superiors who were watching the battle opened their domains almost at the same time. The next moment, the sky fell and the earth cracked. The domain of nothingness exploded like a real thing. The surging magma set off huge waves that were tens of meters high. The scorching temperature rose and spread. The magma was endless, and suddenly it covered the whole area of hundreds of meters around. The green grass was completely submerged, and the whole training ground shook violently. In the core of the battlefield, the sound of weapons colliding kept rising. The invincible sword light kept flying, and there were more and more of them. Under the sword light, there was a sea of fire. At this moment, Feng could clearly see that not far from him, the domain of an invincible realm expert shook for a moment in the impact of the magma. A thunder-shocking realm expert standing not far from him suddenly opened his eyes wide. Before he could even make a sound, a torrent had rushed past him. The lava, mixed with the extremely sharp sword intent, rushed over. The thunder-shocking realm expert had completely disappeared. There was a slight flash of lightning in the magma, which seemed to be the only trace of the existence of the thunder-shocking realm expert. This was Feng's heart skipped a beat. Chaos, what do you mean? Beside the invincible realm expert whose domain was unstable, a strong white man in his 50s suddenly stood up and roared angrily. The man's momentum was extremely amazing. Even in the battle of the invincible realm, he was very elegant when he was angry. We are allies here. You deliberately loosened the domain just now and made me lose a precious subordinate. Chaos. The commander of Knights Templars in Northern Europe. Although he was not an expert on the divine list, Knights Templars was backed by the Vatican, the largest religious organization in the world. With such a backer, Knights Templars could be said to be really domineering in Northern Europe. Chaos's behavior was extremely high profile, and he regarded himself as the chosen one of God. In Northern Europe and even in the whole dark world, he was famous for being domineering. Hearing the questioning from the so-called allies nearby, Chaos was expressionless. He stared at the whole audience with a serious look in his eyes, twitched the corner of his mouth casually, and said disdainfully, "Allies? No, no, no. How can the heretics of the Dark Knights be qualified to be with the people of God? You should be purified by the flame." It was indeed the Dark Knights. Feng's mind was running wild. The Dark World in the area of Northern Europe could be said to be a real separatist regime. It was the place where the major dark forces occupied all year round, and even the battlefield. The headquarters of the two largest knight groups in Europe, Knights Templars and Dark Knights, were located in Northern Europe. These two could be said to be real enemies, and they fought all year round. Because of the fight between the two, there were a lot of interests and variables. Northern Europe could now be said to be a relatively strong place where the major dark forces had penetrated. Heretics. Holiness and darkness? Feng's mind was spinning, but his body was suddenly pulled back by someone. At the same time, he also noticed that the superior of the half-step invincible realm in the Dark Knights changed his face dramatically, and he roared to retreat. In the case that Chaos of the Knights Templars intended to kill them, being a little closer to the battle between Gu Xingyun and the master of Samsara Palace was equivalent to suicide. This kind of figure, which was equivalent to the god of the mortal world, could easily pose a great threat to the superior of the thunder-shocking realm, even if it was unintentional, or even if it was the aftermath of the battle. Feng looked back subconsciously. In his blurred vision, the master of Samsara Palace was still holding the ice sword, but the flame that was getting hotter and hotter suddenly began to spread. Gu Xingyun was surrounded by lightning, and the lightning condensed into thousands of rays of light that were as long as 100 meters around him, rotating around him like lasers. Dark clouds appeared in the sky again. In the sound of thunder, the lightning fell. The lightning around Gu Xingyun became brighter and brighter, connected with the lightning, like the god of thunder. The dense flashing light kept dancing in the air, and the body of the master of Samsara Palace had already flown up and spun. The eighth blade burning sky. This was the power of the eighth blade, which belonged to the invincible realm, and the sword intent of the god's domain. The spreading sea of magma and fire shrank in an instant, and countless magma gathered toward the master of Samsara Palace. More and more. Thunder and lightning rose in the sky. A strong gust of wind suddenly arrived. It was windy. It was not a strong wind, but a fiercely rotating tornado. Fire tornado. The fierce wind mixed with sword intent drove a large amount of magma to rise like a dragon. The sword intent turned again. The magma that gathered together turned with the whistling wind. The wind and fire expanded in the air, like the power of heaven and earth. The fire tornado spun rapidly and rushed to Gu Xingyun. Wherever it passed, there was no grass, only a sea of fire. Dense, continuous, crazy. Fighting. Fighting all the time. The moment the two sides came into contact, the battle did not stop at all. All kinds of unique skills were mixed with ruthless attacks, and everyone watching was dumbfounded. Are they really going to fight to the death? The lightning and the magma collided and surged. In the battlefield within a radius of hundreds of meters, there were gorgeous and fatal colors like fireworks everywhere. Gu Xingyun looked calm and rushed directly to the fire tornado in front of him. Countless rotating lightning around him gathered into a huge shield in front of him, breaking through the waves of fire, breaking through the hurricane. Gu Xingyun's body shook violently. Countless lightning around him instantly left his body. A large number of light rays, like meteors, rushed to the master of Samsara Palace without reservation. The eighth supreme sword move. The 7 unique flowing lights. Sparks and lightning exploded in the air one after another. The entire number 1 training ground had become a real death zone. The fire and lightning fell on the ground, and the raging fire burned on the ground that had been blasted by the lightning. All the spectators had retreated to the outside of the number 1 training ground, watching the world-shaking battle, with a solemn look. Gu Xingyun was moving forward. His steps were getting bigger and faster. Running, sprinting. Countless lightning and sparks exploded around him. In the doomsday-like scene, he was like a demon shuttling in the end of the world, moving forward with indomitable will, and looking down on everything. Take off. With the rotating sword light, the master of Samsara Palace fell. Gu Xingyun's body rose from the ground and instantly passed over the head of the master of Samsara Palace. His legs gathered strength in the air. Gu Xingyun's face was cold. His body fell, and he stepped directly on the head of the master of Samsara Palace. Domain. A domain that was countless times stronger than before appeared directly. Ninth secluded impasse. The bright sky completely faded in an instant. A thick darkness suddenly fell. The fire went out, the lightning disappeared, and the air was broken. Everything around seemed to return to the most primitive state. Darkness. In the void. There was nothing. In the darkness, the master of Samsara Palace suddenly raised her head. Without any hesitation. The 15th blade. Samsara. The sword light hidden in the darkness lit up. A sword stabbed straight. The shattering of land. The 19th blade. The whole world seemed to be broken in an instant. In the messy and extremely violent sword intent, there were only illusions left. A figure that was very strange to everyone suddenly appeared in everyone's sight. It seemed real and illusory, as if it was far away in the sky. He stepped forward, raised his sword, and stabbed straight. This was a vague but clear shadow. His movement was extremely slow, but it had a kind of strength and aggressiveness that could break heaven and earth. In the scene that seemed real and illusory, he raised the sword edge. This was an extremely quiet sword, but also an extremely violent sword. The endless void was full of gods and demons, and all living beings in the world. With the thrust of the sword, everything vanished into thin air under the sword. What was invincibility? What was the peak? This sword was the real invincibility and peak. Who is this? Everyone, including Gu Xingyun, subconsciously had a question. In the monitoring room, Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong, who had seen this scene and even the shadow, had narrowed his eyes tightly. This sword again. This shadow again. He had seen it on Mount Dibing, but that sword had not been used. Now he saw it again. This sword tore apart the domain of the 9th secluded impasse of Kunlun City in an instant. In front of the sword intent that almost shattered heaven and earth. Even as the Sword Emperor, he felt suffocated for a moment. The 15th blade. Samsara. Who was the master of Samsara Palace? Whose sword intent did she reincarnate into? This was a question that Wang Tianzong was very interested in. After seeing that sword for the first time, he had secretly studied the information of the war gods of Zhuanyuantai. He could basically be sure that the sword intent of the master of Samsara Palace did not match any war god of Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun City at all. But the sword intent of Samsara was not fictitious. This sword could be used, which proved that this person did exist. Who was she? Who was she reincarnated? For a moment, Wang Tianzong even wanted to try this sword that made him suffocated and excited. The cold sword edge stabbed straight up. Gu Xingyun, whose expression changed dramatically, suddenly rose. The domain formed by the 9th secluded impasse was completely torn apart in an instant. The darkness collapsed and was condensed by the sword intent. A black tide that seemed to tear the heaven and earth suddenly appeared on the battlefield. It went straight up and fiercely hit everything above it. Gu Xingyun's body rose nearly 10 meters. His eyes narrowed tightly, and his face was unprecedentedly cold and hard. The black tide rose straight up. Gu Xingyun reached out his hands, made a gesture of holding hands, and suddenly smashed down. Boom! An explosive roar resounded through the whole field. A purer and almost perfect dark domain suddenly appeared. A full blow. The dark domain was compatible with the black tide. The most perfect domain fell straight down. This was the strongest blow. 10 skills of true martial arts. 10th unique domain. A cruel smile flashed across Gu Xingyun's mouth. Before the smile disappeared, his expression had changed dramatically. It was as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. It was absurd, shocking, incredible, and unbelievable. He suddenly opened his eyes wide. In addition to shock, there was only pure terror left in his eyes. The 10th unique domain below, which was far more perfect and powerful than the 9th secluded impasse, disappeared instantly. It didn't break, but disappeared inexplicably. The darkness disappeared without a trace, and the sun shrouded the earth. Only the sword was still rising. The shattering of land. At the moment when light and darkness alternated, A loud noise suddenly rang out on the battlefield, mixed with Gu Xingyun's voice full of fear. 10th unique domain. Who the hell are you? 10th unique domain. This was the only reason. This woman, who had the core inheritance of the Li family, had been forbearing from the beginning until the last moment. When Gu Xingyun used the 10th unique domain, this woman, this damn woman, actually used the 10th unique domain in the sword intent of the shattering of land. The real 10th unique domain. The same unique technique was perfectly offset. But how the F*CK was this possible? The loud noise spread. The violent smoke mixed with the ashes of the fire spread like ripples on the ground, and countless blood sprinkled in the smoke. In the midst of the chaos, the master of Samsara Palace stood there quietly. But Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, had disappeared from the battlefield. The warm sun shone brightly, and the sound of the surging river and sea came from afar. Everything was soft and beautiful. The entire scene was dead silent. The master of Samsara Palace stood there quietly. After a long time, her body moved slightly. Through the black veil under the cloak, she looked up at the sky in her sight. Her eyes were complicated, with regret, but more than that, there was a kind of attachment from the soul. The past was ethereal, and the present was stable. She glanced at the crowd watching the ceremony in the distance, turned around, and left silently. The soft wind blew away her whisper, and she was in a trance. Chapter 162. It wasn't until the powerful black figure disappeared from their sight that the silent crowd regained some vitality. The soft voices were very low at the beginning. They were very careful and sounded more like whispers. After nearly 10 minutes, the crowd's volume completely returned to normal. Peace had been restored on the battlefield. The twisted air lost its power and became stable. Ice chips and flames filled the sky. When the gentle wind blew, the grass was wantonly decayed. Countless ashes after being burned by the flames rose in the wind and drifted to the nearby river and sea. The flat ground was already in a mess. Within a radius of nearly a kilometer, the places where the fire tornado blew were all ruined and desolate. The spectators from the dark forces stood in front of the battlefield and looked at everything in front of them. Everyone seemed to be thinking about something. The tornado that swept the world and the black tide that shattered everything seemed to be continuing. The invincible sword intent spread to the highest part of the sky. The sword and the flowing light still collided with each other in the dark domain. The illusionary figure was still clear. He raised his sword and shattered the mountains and rivers. The whispers lasted for a few minutes and then fell silent. Today's battle lasted less than 10 minutes from beginning to end, but it could be said to be the most powerful battle between gods in the dark world in the past 20 years. The result was obvious, but also somewhat confusing. But everyone knew that with the end of this battle, the ranking on the divine list was bound to have a slight adjustment in the near future. Gu Xingyun lost? Someone in the crowd suddenly said in a low voice. It was silent all around. Gu Xingyun lost. The result was obvious now. But the question was, what happened to Gu Xingyun? It was a battle to the death, but now the result was clear. Gu Xingyun disappeared. Everything happened too fast when black and white alternated. It could be said to be the most wonderful part of the battle, but it was also a moment that no one saw clearly. Gu Xingyun disappeared. Was he alive or dead? Such a brilliant battle, but in the end, it ended in such an inexplicable ending. In an instant, everyone seemed to have a stomach full of anger. In the crowd, Tianhai Wuji suddenly turned around and looked around. He frowned and asked, "Where is Principal Zhuang?" As the headmaster of the Sky Academy, Zhuang Huayang could be said to be the real host, and the person in charge of receiving all the visitors. After they arrived at the Sky Academy, Wang Tianzong, the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, showed up and then disappeared, maintaining his deterrent power as the first on the divine list. For the rest of the time, Zhuang Huayang was in charge of receiving them. However, when everyone looked over, they found that Zhuang Huayang, who had been sitting with them and smiling not long ago, had completely disappeared without them noticing. And didn't you notice? The Sky Academy seems to be too quiet today. Luxing Songchuan walked out and suddenly said. Everyone was stunned again. It was already past 8 in the morning. Usually, at this time, The freshmen of the Sky Academy had already started their classes. Before, they were attracted by the fierce battle, so no one paid attention to it. At this time, when Luxing Songquan reminded them, they suddenly found that the whole Sky Academy seemed to be dead silent, as if all the teachers and students had completely disappeared. The atmosphere in the crowd instantly became strange. Luxing Songquan and Tianhai Wuji, who were entangled with complicated grievances, looked at each other quietly. Before Tianhai Wuji could speak, a phone suddenly rang. Tianhai Wuji took out his phone and looked at the number. He raised his eyebrows slightly, seeming to be surprised. He picked up the phone and said calmly, "Mr. Miyamoto, what's the matter?" "Mr. Tianhai, what's the result of the battle in Zhongzhou State?" On the phone, Shinichi Miyamoto, the only supreme ninja in East Island, sounded a little tired. He seemed to be calling Tianhai Wuji at the right time. When it was about time, he directly called. "The master of Samsara Palace won." Tianhai Wuji's tone was calm, with a hint of joy. Although the inexplicable disappearance of Gu Xingyun, the war god of Zhongzhou State, under the sword light of the master of Samsara Palace, a large amount of blood spilled out was real. Even if Gu Xingyun was still alive, he must be seriously injured, which was more conducive for them to carry out the action plan. Gu Xingyun, if I'm right, should be seriously injured. A real serious injury. Should be. Shinichi Miyamoto retorted coldly. Tianhai Wuji was a little embarrassed. As an invincible realm expert on the divine list, he didn't see the last strike between the two clearly. It was not a good thing to say. He answered vaguely, "Mr. Miyamoto, I'm ready to take action at any time." On the phone, Shinichi Miyamoto fell silent. He was silent for about half a minute before he said in a low voice, "Mr. Tianhai, if it's possible, please take our people back to East Island. The more the better. If the situation doesn't allow, you and Mr. Luxing can give up on the others and come back first. I'm sorry I didn't tell you in advance. The situation in East Island is a little out of control. I tried, but I failed. Most of the elites of Zhongzhou State are in East Island now, lurking all over East Island." The bright and dazzling sun shone on the ground, and the hot air surrounded everyone. For a moment, Tianhai Wuji even thought he had an auditory hallucination. "What?" he said subconsciously. Then he realized what the news he just heard meant. His face changed dramatically, and he subconsciously raised his voice. "What are you talking about? Why didn't you tell me earlier? Does it make any sense, Mr. Tianhai?" Shinichi Miyamoto gave a bitter smile. "We weren't sure if this was a trap set by Zhongzhou State or not. We couldn't be sure whether this was set in East Island or Zhongzhou State. If we told you in advance, we would only panic. Now that I've heard what you said, I'm almost sure that this is set in East Island. Your situation now may not be dangerous, but it's not optimistic. The most important thing is that East Island needs your and Mr. Liuxing's support I'll be right back," Tianhai Wuji said flatly, interrupting Shinichi Miyamoto. He held the phone tightly. Suddenly he seemed to realize something. He asked subconsciously, then, he glanced around with the corner of his eyes. Luxing Songquan's eyebrows were slightly furrowed, and his face looked serious. But Huan Kong, the superior of the invincible realm in fantasy world, and Chaos, the commander of the Knights Templars, looked calm. No one could tell what they were thinking. "Others," he said vaguely and quickly. Shinichi Miyamoto immediately understood what Tianhai Wuji meant. He sighed deeply and said in a deep voice, "We can't hide the news from East Island. Now the country is in chaos, and the whole dark world knows about it. But South America, North America, and Northern Europe haven't done anything yet. Of course, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Mr. Tianhai, I'm under a lot of pressure at home. I don't have the energy to care about other things." Tianhai Wuji's heart sank again. He knew what kind of person Shinichi Miyamoto was. His tone showed that the situation at home was so bad that it couldn't be delayed. Who on earth led the team from Zhongzhou State to East Island? The look in his eyes changed slightly. He took a deep breath and hung up the phone. Jiang Qianyan, Huan Kong, and Chaos. The three of them were all expressionless. No one knew what they were thinking about. Tianhai Wuji sneered in his heart. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't tell him about East Island until now because he didn't want him to panic. At the same time, he still hoped that they could continue to act in Zhongzhou State. But it was impossible that the Jiang family of South America, Fantasy World, and Knights Templars didn't get the news. Their silence until now had subtly reflected their possible change of attitude. Allies or enemies kept changing in the general trend. Tianhai Wuji couldn't say anything. He could only strengthen his defense. If the situation at East Island was so bad that it even caused the collapse of the special warfare system, no matter if it was Fantasy World, Knights Templars, or the Jiang family of South America, they wouldn't give up the benefits at hand. At that time, East Island, Tianhai Wuji's eyes were cold. He subconsciously held the hilt of the saber at his waist with one hand. "Let's go," he said in a firm tone. "Go back to East Island now." The heaven and earth in front of him suddenly shook violently. In the distance, a figure suddenly approached Tianhai Wuji. For a moment, the whole world seemed to become a giant sword. Zhuang Huayang never showed up. Wang Tianzong, the sword emperor of Zhongzhou State, showed up in front of Tianhai Wuji. A man and a sword, standing in the air. He stood in the air, narrowed his eyes and chuckled. "Why are you in such a hurry to leave, Mr. Tianhai? Although there aren't many scenic spots in Huading, there are wonderful places in Jinling and Linen. I'm willing to be a tour guide and accompany Mr. Tianhai and Mr. Luxing in Zhongzhou State for a few days. I just don't know if you're willing to give me face." At the same time, as far as the eyes could see, the master of Samsara Palace, who walked away silently, suddenly stopped. She turned around and looked directly at the crowd of spectators. Tianhai Wuji's heart suddenly sank, but he still looked calm on the surface. "I also want to invite you two to tour Zhongzhou State. Since you have nothing to do and don't need to go back to North America and Northern Europe in a hurry, why don't you take a rest in Zhongzhou State for a few days?" The master of Samsara Palace didn't move, but her steady voice came through the air. Her words weren't directed at anyone, but it was self-evident who she was referring to when she mentioned North America and Northern Europe. Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars, and Huan Kong, the lord of Fantasy World, who had been watching the show, changed their expressions at the same time. The two of them had never thought that they would be implicated in this matter. "Your Highness, what do you mean?" After a few seconds of silence, Chaos stepped forward and asked in a deep voice. The momentum of an invincible realm superior spread out without reservation. He stared at the master of Samsara Palace in the distance with sharp eyes, showing that he was ready to fight at all costs. One of the dominators of the dark world in Northern Europe was very tall but very thin. His head was round and big and he had a beard. At first glance, the commander of Knights Templars looked like a deformed person, which left a deep impression on people. Huan Kong didn't change his expression, but when the master of Samsara Palace finished speaking, his whole body became illusory. His outfit was basically the same as the master of Samsara Palace's, but he was wearing a silver cloak. The cloak covered his body. It was even hard to tell whether he was a man or a woman. The silver cloak reflected a dazzling light. Under the sun, he stood there, but he gave people a feeling that he suddenly appeared and disappeared. It was so weird and unpredictable. "The matter of East Island has nothing to do with Fantasy World." A soft and neutral voice rang out. Huan Kong said calmly and elegantly, "Your Highness, you want to force me to stay in Zhongzhou State. Isn't that too overbearing? It's just a normal trip." The master of Samsara Palace's tone became calmer. "If you don't want to support East Island, why do you care about our little rudeness? The scenic spots of Zhongzhou State won't let you down." Huan Kong and Chaos looked at each other subconsciously. Of course, they didn't want to support East Island, but it was a good opportunity to send someone or even go to East Island to fight for territory. Now that the master of Samsara Palace forced them to stay, it was obvious what she meant. Even if they wanted to fight for territory because they were deeply involved in Zhongzhou State, the territory they got wouldn't be good. Zhongzhou State and Samsara made it clear that they wanted to share the benefits of East Island equally. What a big appetite. "You." Tianhai Wuji couldn't help but fly into a rage. In a few simple words, Zhongzhou State's wild ambition was exposed. In Wang Tianzong's eyes, which suddenly became sharp, the sword master of East Island suddenly pulled out his saber. The bright blade broke through the air, and a faint green appeared on the blade instantly. The air was turbulent fiercely. Tianhai Wuji held the saber with both hands, looked at Wang Tianzong in the air in front of him, and said calmly, "Get out of the way. I have to go back." "You don't give me face?" Wang Tianzong tilted his head and said indifferently, "We can't give face to His Majesty. Today he and I have to leave the Sky Academy." In the crisp clang, Luxing Songquan's figure, which had drawn his sword, slid forward for a distance in a weird way. There seemed to be a gust of wind whistling in the calm air. In front of Luxing Songquan and Tianhai Wuji, a wall made of pure wind spread out. The gust of wind whistled. The wind wall stood in front of the two, and it was as lofty as a mountain in the gust of wind. "If I don't let you go, you can't go." Wang Tianzong looked down at the wind wall below and said expressionlessly. Tianhai Wuji suddenly swore in Japanese. The blade with faint green light was raised, and the whole person disappeared in an instant. His person and his saber completely dissipated in the air. Only the bright saber light tore through the air and directly enveloped Wang Tianzong. Luxing Songquan's hand holding the sword shook, and the gust of wind was like a tornado. It blew directly to Wang Tianzong. In the middle of the crowd, Jiang Qianyan stepped back slightly. A calm voice with cold anger sounded. "Jiang Qianyan? There is a case in Kunlun City, and I need you to go back with me to investigate." Jiang Qianyan, who was about to leave quietly, suddenly stopped and turned slightly. In his sight, Gu Xingyun, who had changed his clothes, appeared behind Jiang Qianyan with a cold expression. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the inexplicably furious war god of Zhongzhou state in front of him. He suddenly smiled and said softly, "Your Highness war god, in your current state, can you stop me? Even if you can, I still have the legend of Qin. Shouldn't you consider the consequences? It's enough for your Highness war god to stop the second master." A rough voice rang out. In the crowd of spectators, the leader of the half-step invincible realm expert of the Dark Knights, who was originally the least valued, walked out of the crowd. "The murderous weapon, the legend of Qin. I will stop it for your Highness war god." He walked forward quickly, and a black spear at least 2 meters long appeared directly in his hand. The darkness spread. The black and somewhat weird spear body seemed to swallow everything. One of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World. The Dark Saint's Spear. Jiang Qianyan's pupils suddenly contracted. There will be one more chapter in a while. Yesterday, in the reader group, he had agreed to publish 2 chapters before 12 o'clock. He even gambled his penis. As a result, when he got up today, he realized that today was the 15th day of the first lunar month. He couldn't keep his penis. Chapter 163. There was never a lack of noble guests in the barren and poor camp. This was a strange phenomenon that every veteran at the border had long been accustomed to. The whole camp had no code name, but it was clearly recorded in the military files of Zhongzhou State. Its level was not low, but in fact, the total number of all the personnel could not even meet the standard of an elite company. A camp of less than 100 people had been stationed at the border for more than 20 years. There was no rear, only a front line. From the map of the whole Zhongzhou State, the camp in front of them could be said to be the closest place to Annan State, and they could not go any further. In the plum rain season, the drizzle beat on the whole primeval forest. The rain was not heavy, but it did not seem to stop. From morning to night, there seemed to be only the sound of wind and rain left between heaven and earth. The rain wrapped the forest. The forest surrounded the camp. This camp, which had no weapons of mass destruction, no support, and even no supplies, seemed to be forgotten by the whole world in the vast curtain of rain. Looking down from the sky, the atmosphere was particularly silent, and even a little sad. There were no clear rules and regulations in the camp. It was the last refuge for a group of down-and-out people. Although it was a military camp, to a certain extent, freedom and survival were the primary concerns of everyone in the camp. Training depended on self-awareness, and there was no military discipline, so naturally, there was no violation. In the remote mountains and forests, it seemed that any restriction of Zhongzhou State could not extend here. For these dozens of veterans, as long as the old man in the camp did not speak, even if the king came, it would not work here. The helicopter hovered and landed at a high altitude. From the angle of high altitude, everything below could be clearly seen through the curtain of rain. It was quiet in the camp. Occasionally, people in military uniforms passed by, and they looked extremely unorganized. As the helicopter descended lower and lower, the roar of the rotors was enough to alarm the whole camp. But in the loud sound, the whole camp still seemed to be in a deep sleep, and no one came out to greet them from beginning to end. Look down. What does it look like? In the cabin of the helicopter, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man asked softly. The cabin was extremely spacious, and there were very few passengers. To be exact, there were only 2 people, one standing and one sitting. The middle-aged man who was sitting casually supported his chin with his hand, looking at the camp that was constantly enlarging in his sight. His expression was calm, but his eyes gradually focused. This was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. He was dressed in a suit and had an ordinary appearance. His hair was neatly combed, and he looked low-key yet elegant. Several military elites who were temporarily serving as waiters stood on the other side of the cabin. Their eyes occasionally moved, and their eyes were filled with awe, respect, and even fanaticism. The middle-aged man didn't have much of an imposing manner. He was gentle and calm, but he had a breadth of mind that could be easily sensed by anyone. It was broad and vast, like the starry sky. His every move was filled with hidden majesty. He looked at the campsite below without blinking. Rather than saying he was watching, it was more like he was staring. Military discipline is messy. It's a mess. There are no rules at all. How can it look like a campsite? Next to the middle-aged man stood a man of the same age. Different from the peaceful middle-aged man who seemed to be able to tolerate everything in the world. He was a standard domineering man. He was burly and had a resolute look. Dressed in a general's uniform, he looked extremely powerful. The general of Zhongzhou State stood next to the middle-aged man like the most loyal guard. He was talking nonsense, but there was not much anger in his tone, just a hint of disapproval. The helicopter was about to land. The general pointed to the star flag of Zhongzhou State hanging outside the cabin and said flatly, "Their presence here is an insult to the army and this flag." The star flag. This was the national flag of Zhongzhou State. In the army and at the border, it was the pride of a big country that would fly in the air every day. It was sacred, majestic, and represented the supreme glory. Insult. The ordinary-looking middle-aged man raised his eyebrows slightly, and his eyes became deeper. The scenery outside the window was getting lower as the helicopter landed. He chuckled and said softly, "Did they insult the star flag? Or did the star flag insult them?" The general's face changed, and he was speechless for a while. The middle-aged man took a deep breath and pointed to the campsite outside the cabin again. "What do they look like?" The general looked out of the window, and then at the middle-aged man beside him with a blank face. "They look like a group of dormant tigers." The middle-aged man said to himself, "This is their lair. Military discipline is messy. I know you advocate wolf-pack tactics and pay attention to teamwork and cooperation. But what's left here is a group of tigers. The use of tactics is a reflection of the lack of strength. When the individual strength is extremely strong, the so-called rules and discipline will not make them stronger, but will add countless burdens to them. You can say that I'm wrong, and you can refute me with examples, but I stick to my opinion." His voice was low and soft, and his eyes sparkled with stubborn and persistent light. Because from this point of view, the people and things that can be cited by you can only show that they are not strong enough. The helicopter finally landed. In the campsite, a middle-aged woman who looked to be in her 40s walked over slowly. Looking at the open cabin, her expression was calm and a little numb. The middle-aged man walked out of the helicopter first, and the mighty general beside him followed him step by step. It rained in the jungle, and the rain beat on the primeval forest on the southwest border of Zhongzhou State. The heat in the campsite was slightly reduced, but it became more irritating and sultry. It seemed that even the weather was hostile to the campsite that Zhongzhou State had remembered and deliberately forgotten for many years. The moment they walked out of the cabin, the sultry and suffocating air attacked them. The middle-aged man who looked very young felt dizzy and couldn't breathe for a while. "I'm really old." The middle-aged man stood in front of the cabin door for a while, took several deep breaths in a row, and laughed at himself after adapting to the surrounding air. You're in the prime of your life, but the environment here is really a little bad. The general supported the middle-aged man calmly and said. The man shook his head and walked out of the cabin. Outside the cabin, the middle-aged woman who had been watching all this calmly and numbly took a step forward and said lightly, I'm Qingye. Please follow me. Qingye. Qingye. The middle-aged man didn't respond, but the general beside him suddenly reacted after silently reciting the code name twice. Although he knew where they were this time at this moment, he still couldn't recognize it, and was a little surprised. The general subconsciously straightened his body, and seemed to want to give a military salute. But when he raised his hand halfway, he looked at the empty epaulette of the other party and put his hand down again. After a while, the corner of his mouth twitched, and he unconsciously used honorifics. You were the captain of Totem Squadron back then? Qingye, Major General Qingye? Zhongzhou Totem Squadron. In the entire special warfare system, Totem Squadron could be said to be one of the most elite special warfare agencies. For the entire Zhongzhou state, it was an extremely old agency. Now it was only an agency at the level of deputy governor, but it was not inferior to most agencies at the level of governor. The general was now one of the most powerful figures in Zhongzhou state, but when he was young, he was trained in Totem Squadron and had seen Qingye. In his memory, she was an extremely beautiful woman. After so many years, when he saw Qingye again, the general suddenly found that what impressed him most was the shining epaulette of Major General on the woman's shoulder. Qingye nodded with an indifferent expression. Totem Squadron. Hearing the name again after so many years, she didn't feel the slightest fluctuation in her heart. In retrospect of more than 20 years of ups and downs, the pride and glory of the past seemed to be in her last life. Please. Qingye led the way sideways and took the lead to go straight to the only small wooden building in the center of the camp, which was a little higher. The general took a deep breath and followed the middle-aged man to the wooden building. He looked at the face that was still as beautiful as before, but had been through a lot of hardships. This place was not far from the wooden building in the center of the camp, about 100 meters away. Looking down, it was enough to see everything outside clearly. When the roar of the helicopter's rotors quieted down, Li Honghe, who had supported this special camp in Zhongzhou state for 20 years, stood in front of the door and watched the three people in his sight walk over in the rain. The middle-aged man's face gradually became clear. Li Honghe narrowed his eyes and watched calmly, but he didn't mean to go downstairs to welcome them. Grandpa Li, is there someone else? A voice rang out behind Li Honghe. Although it was made of wood, it was still uncomfortably damp inside the room. A young man with thick eyebrows and big eyes was meditating. When the roar of the helicopter disappeared, he also opened his eyes and stood up from the bed. The young man looked about 24 or 25 years old. He looked a little dull and not tall, but he was extremely well-proportioned and strong. He walked toward Li Honghe. There was no extraordinary momentum when he walked, but there was a very natural rhythm. This was the most talented young man in the whole camp besides Li Tianlan. He was Qingye's son. After Li Tianlan left, the young man was asked by Li Honghe to move into this wooden building, and was personally guided by Li Honghe to polish his martial arts. Yes, there's a big shot. Li Honghe stood quietly with a kind and gentle smile, but there was a strange solemnity in his eyes. It seems that Tianlan is doing well in Huiting. For the whole camp, Li Tianlan's development in the outside world was the most worthy of their interest. The young man's eyes lit up, and his dull expression gradually became lively. He giggled. It seems that the plan needs to be changed. Li Honghe looked at the approaching middle-aged man and the general, and whispered to himself. Then he suddenly asked, Wangxing, do you want to go out? Go help Tianlan? The young man named Wangxing was stunned, and opened his mouth subconsciously. He looked at Li Honghe dumbfoundedly and stammered. Grandpa Li, can I? Of course you can if you want to. Li Honghe laughed softly and kept his composure. After a short excitement, the young man quickly calmed down. He took a deep breath, and his eyes sparkled with the light of thinking. Less than a minute passed quickly, but Wangxing seemed to have spoken a lot. When the middle-aged man below was about to approach the wooden building, he said softly, Grandpa Li, I'm willing to go out, but. Li Honghe raised his chin and looked at the middle-aged man below. He said softly, "You will follow him into the secular world today." At the same time, Qingye appeared under the wooden building with the middle-aged man and the general in military uniform, upstairs and downstairs. Their actual ages weren't that far apart. At the very least, the two of them stared at each other with a much smaller age gap. The middle-aged man chuckled and bowed deeply to Li Honghe upstairs. "Li Huaqing greets you, Senior Li." The general's face changed and he also bowed slightly. Upstairs, Li Honghe narrowed his eyes slightly. After a moment of silence, he said calmly, "Come up." He turned around and walked into the damp wooden house. The young man named Wangxing followed him quietly and asked subconsciously with a smile, "Grandpa Li, his surname is also Li. Is he really a big shot?" "There are many people with the surname Li." Li Honghe smiled and said, "As for a big shot, well, at least now in the whole Zhongzhou state, there is no bigger figure than him." He shook his head and seemed to be a little emotional, with a strong sense of surprise. "Li Huaqing, the director of the Zhongzhou State Decision-Making Committee, the minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, the big boss of the academics." This name was extremely strange to the whole camp. But outside, in Zhongzhou State with a population of 1.5 billion, it was absolutely known to everyone. Because behind the series of prominent identities, he had an even more prominent identity: the president of Zhongzhou State, Li Huaqing. Chapter 164. No one would have thought that on the day when the whole dark world was paying attention to Zhongzhou State, and the result of the final battle between the master of Samsara Palace and the god of war of Zhongzhou State, the supreme leader of Zhongzhou State would come to the border in person and come to the place where the Li family was dormant in a very covert and low-key way. Li Honghe himself was deeply surprised. But apart from the surprise, he did not show much excitement and joy. In terms of attitude, he was even a little cold and indifferent. The president came in person. The former god of war of Zhongzhou State did not even go down to greet him. He just showed his face casually and walked back to the wooden house full of humidity and stuffy air. Downstairs, the president of Zhongzhou State, who had a vast aura, slightly narrowed his eyes, and there seemed to be a flash of light in his pupils. This kind of attitude was not gentle, but it could not be said to be disgusting. Li Honghe's behavior could be regarded as a kind of casual, and it could not be clearer what it meant. For Li Huaqing, who had been psychologically prepared to get nothing, Li Honghe's attitude was a real surprise. He did not need the so-called respect and politeness, especially for people like Li Honghe. The kinder they showed, the more likely they would be to disappoint people in the end. In the past 20 years, every 2 years at most, leaders of the decision-making committee of Zhongzhou State would come here for New Year's greetings or visits. There were all kinds of reasons. Li Honghe would greet them in person every time. He would scold his treacherous son and make a self-criticism for Zhongzhou State. His attitude could be said to be impeccable. But for many years, no matter who came here, no one could get what they wanted. The respect and smiling face of this old fox, no matter how sincere and kind he was not much better. On the contrary, this kind of casual attitude was easier to get closer and liked. In the drizzle, Li Huaqing shook his clothes and walked alone to the wooden building in front of him, which was more like an observatory than a residence. He went up the stairs. His body gradually rose. Looking down from above, everything in the camp seemed to be always the same, lifeless, with a kind of sorrow after the fall of a super force, desolate like a desperate situation. But Li Honghe changed. The corner of Li Huaqing's mouth twitched. He made an expression that no one knew what it meant. After going upstairs, he pushed open the door. In the room, a young man in his 20s was standing in front of a small desk, practicing calligraphy. The young man had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He wasn't ugly, but his overly stiff expression made him look less impressive. He held the brush in his hand tightly, his eyes focused on each stroke. Li Honghe sat opposite the young man, holding a broken porcelain bowl in his hand and drinking water in silence. When Li Huaqing walked in, the two characters under the young man's pen had gradually taken shape. He didn't say anything and just watched the young man put down the last stroke. His eyes flickered slightly. The young man's handwriting did not have the style of a master, but between the lines, there was an almost paranoid neatness. Every stroke, horizontal, vertical, vertical. Perhaps it was because the handwriting was too neat, but when the handwriting landed on the paper, it gave off an extremely strange feeling of incongruity. The two words that were originally familiar seemed to have become a little distorted in the line of sight. Freedom. Li Huaqing said it silently. In the somewhat dull atmosphere, he stared at the words in front of him for a long time, and then asked softly, "What is freedom?" Grandpa Li said, "Freedom is not to do what you want, but not to do what you don't want." Li Huaqing looked at the middle-aged man in front of him, who had actually entered the old age. His tone was soft, and his eyes were clear and focused, like the stars that had never been stained. Li Huaqing was silent. Senior Li is really a wise man in the world. After a long time, the president of Zhongzhou State, who still looked in the prime of his life, smiled and suddenly said, "In Senior Li's view, how many people in the world have this form of freedom?" "Maybe I can?" Li Honghe smiled and poured water into another bowl. The food in the camp was extremely bad, but there was a water source nearby, and the water was clear and cool. Every mouthful had a strong taste of simplicity, nourishing the heart and nourishing people. Water flowed in the bowl, and Li Honghe said with a chuckle, "For example, if I don't want to go out, no one can make me go out. Whether it's the general trend or survival in the cracks. Anyway, after so many years, this is the fact, right?" "It sounds right." Li Huaqing moved a chair over. Li Huaqing nodded, and sat down unceremoniously. He stared at Li Honghe, who was drinking water, and continued to ask, "But after so many years, do you really think you are very free? Within a radius of 100 miles, there is no one, the worst living environment, the worst food and the most dangerous plot." He gently patted the table and looked at Li Honghe deeply. "And the most important cemetery behind the camp, Senior Li, have you ever been free in the past 20 years? Has the Li family ever been free?" Li Honghe's movements paused, and his whole body stayed motionless like a statue for 5 minutes. He was not awakened by the wisdom, like hearing the evening drum and the morning bell. On the contrary, under Li Huaqing's gaze, his momentum became weaker and weaker. He shook his head and said lightly, "No." "Then go out." Li Huaqing suddenly waved his hand and looked at Li Honghe sincerely. "Senior Li, the times are different now, and the situation is very delicate. If you are willing to go out, there may be resistance. To put it bluntly, there may be danger, but you are a person who has experienced great storms and waves. For hundreds of years, when has the war god family ever been afraid of enemies? Compared with the life here, why not go out and fight for a better future?" "Oh, go out? Go out." In the slightly self-deprecating rhetorical question, the answer was really resolute. There was silence again in the hot and humid environment, which was almost suffocating. After a long while, Li Honghe shook his head and said flatly, "It's not the time yet." Li Huaqing's expression froze, and the light in his eyes suddenly surged. He took a deep breath, as if he didn't hear Li Honghe's words clearly. "You just said, it's not the time yet." Li Honghe repeated it again. Li Huaqing's tight muscles relaxed, and he finally stretched out a sincere and happy smile. He smiled and handed Li Honghe a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep breath. He said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to say that." He really didn't expect it. When he asked how many people in the world could have freedom, the conversation had actually entered the main topic, but Li Honghe's answer made him a little uncertain. But he understood that it was not the time yet. It was an answer beyond everyone's expectations. Under normal circumstances, Li Honghe had basically begun to criticize himself, express his repentance to Zhongzhou State, and strengthen his determination to defend the border after several visits from different leaders in the past. But this time, what did Li Honghe say? "It was not the time. I didn't expect you to come either." Li Honghe chuckled and took the initiative to poke through the window paper. "It seems that Tianlan is doing well in the Sky Academy?" Li Huaqing, who was listening to the conversation silently, suddenly brightened his eyes. "Very good. His ability to cause trouble are superb. He is now in East Island. When he comes back, the level of his East Emperor Palace will probably..." Puff. Li Honghe suddenly spat out the water he had just drunk. The word freedom written by Li Wangxing was stained with water. The ink was dizzy, and the smell of ink wafted. Li Wangxing's body shook, and he subconsciously touched the table. The scorching temperature swept over, and the water on the table and the paper all disappeared. Not even a little ash was left. This was a control that was enough to make most experts in the fire-flaming realm marvel. Li Honghe didn't notice this at all. He stared at Li Huaqing and asked incredulously, "What did you say?" "East Emperor Palace." "East Emperor Palace." Li Huaqing looked inexplicable and a little embarrassed. He calmly wiped the water stains on his cuffs and said with a smile, "Is there anything wrong with the name?" "No, nothing." Li Honghe also noticed his gaffe, shook his head and said no more. Li Huaqing didn't ask more and continued, "At present, Tianlan has become a key figure in the general trend. Sai City came forward to protect him, Dongqing clan escorted him. Master of Samsara Palace went straight to Mount Dibbing for his brother-in-law. And even Gu Xingyun in the final battle of Samsara has something to do with him. If this goes on, his identity is likely to be exposed soon, but this is no longer a fatal problem. After all, even we, well, the academics, have bet our future on him. That's why I said the situation is different. At least, the Li family has met the conditions to re-enter the secular world." Gu Xingyun. Li Honghe sighed softly. This man is not so easy to deal with. Well, is the final battle between him and Master of Samsara Palace today? Did he win or lose? Master of Samsara Palace won. Gu, Li Huaqing subconsciously said, but then he suddenly stopped. He looked at Li Honghe in front of him, narrowed his eyes, and his expression suddenly became deep. Li Honghe was also looking at him quietly, with playfulness and a hint of warning in his eyes. He didn't ask how the academics found out Li Tianlan's identity, but this hint of warning was more powerful than his tireless inquiry. In an instant, a cold chill directly rushed into Li Huaqing's mind, making him feel a little cold all over. He quickly recalled what he had just said. He did mention the final battle between Gu Xingyun and Master of Samsara Palace, but he didn't say it was today. Li Honghe, who had rarely walked out of this camp for decades, how did he know? You. Li Huaqing opened his mouth and wanted to say something. But after the intense shock, he calmed down again. He smiled lightly and suppressed all the doubts in his heart. He continued to say, Master of Samsara Palace won. I'm not very clear about the specific situation. I just talked to Tianzong on the phone, and he just said 2 words on the phone. It was a coincidence. Li Honghe nodded with a calm expression, and it seemed that he was not surprised. Li Huaqing looked at the old man in front of him seriously. He had a lot of questions in his heart, but he couldn't ask anything. The 2 simple sentences just now had fully proved that although Li Honghe had been living in seclusion for many years, he was not really ignorant about the general trend of the outside world. This was equivalent to him warning the academics not to play any tricks in contact with Li Tianlan. But as for how Li Honghe contacted the outside world, or what arrangements he had in the outside world, the relationship between them was obviously not that serious. Vaguely, Li Huaqing could clearly feel that it would be the biggest mistake of the Special Warfare Group, the Prince Group, and even the Southeast Group to let such an old fox, who seemed to be living in seclusion, but still had the ability to manipulate the general trend of the outside world quietly, lurking at the border for 20 years. Senior Li, in addition to asking you to come out of seclusion today, there is another important thing I want to ask you. Li Huaqing looked at Li Honghe's non-committal expression and continued. About 6 hours ago, Master of Samsara Palace defeated Gu Xingyun with the 24 moves of sword, the unique skill of the Li family. Samsara Palace has been developing very fast in the dark world in recent years. But this Master of Samsara Palace, what is her identity? I wonder if you can answer our questions, Senior Li? This could be regarded as a very hidden question, but the 2 sides were real allies at present, so it was not a big deal to reveal a little. At least, this question was not something that Li Huaqing and Li Honghe could not talk about. What was the relationship between Master of Samsara Palace and the Li family? Li Honghe did not even need to say too clearly about this question. As long as he gave some hints, It would be enough for Zhongzhou State to completely face up to the relationship with Samsara Palace. This was a matter of national fate. As an old man who had devoted most of his life to Zhongzhou State without reservation, Li Honghe had no reason to refuse to answer this question. The identity of Master of Samsara Palace. Chapter 165. The drizzle lingered in the long night, drifting all over Changdao. In the early morning, when the sky was just brightening, Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu walked into a fisherman's noodle restaurant on the side of the street in the drizzle that had lasted for nearly a week. It was almost July, and the weather was getting hotter and hotter. However, Changdao was near the sea, so the temperature difference between day and night was slightly big. Moreover, it was a rainy morning, so the whole air was cool. The two walked into the small but extremely clean noodle restaurant in silence. After ordering 2 bowls of fishball noodles, they quietly waited for breakfast to be served. Li Tianlan sat by the window, looking at the drizzle hitting the ground with a calm face. It had been nearly a week since he got rid of my Shiranui's pursuit, and he was still with Jiang Shangyu. It wasn't that he wanted him to stay, but Jiang Shangyu seemed to not want to leave at all. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan naturally couldn't drive him away. In the face of a person who was obviously malicious or even murderous to him, he didn't care about manners. But Jiang Shangyu's murderous intent was looming, and it seemed that he still wanted to kill him. Li Tianlan knew very well that if he acted too vigilant and hurried to keep a distance from him, it would stimulate Jiang Shangyu's subtle psychology at this time, and he might even regard what he did as a sign of his guilty conscience. For such a person who was obviously powerful, but was willing to be inferior to the heavenly sun for many years, he might hesitate to do something before he was sure. But once he made up his mind, nothing could stop him from moving forward. Once he decided to kill him, it would be a fight to the death. With Li Tianlan's current strength, he wouldn't be afraid of anyone. Jiang Shangyu might hesitate, but he knew very well that what he said a few days ago was true. If he fought with Jiang Shangyu would die, but he would certainly pay a great price. In such a battle, even if he could survive, he was afraid that he couldn't escape my Shiranui's pursuit. In Li Tianlan's view, it was completely stupid to fight with the so-called own people in a foreign country. It would be best if both sides could restrain their emotions. So on the premise that they both wanted to kill each other, they quietly joined forces and took action at the same time. In nearly a week, nearly 10 famous figures in Changdao were all assassinated. There was a thunder-shocking realm expert, 3 fire-flaming realm experts, a bank manager, 2 senior officials, a scholar, a gang leader, and a patriarch of a wealthy family in East Island. At this point, the hunting list in Li Tianlan's hand was nearly half complete. After Li Tianlan, Wang Shengxiao, and Gu Hanshan, the 3 heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State, left Dongdu. Jiang Shangyu, who also got part of the second hunting list, also wiped out all his targets in Changdao. Both sides seemed to slowly realize the benefits of joint action. Given their age and strength, it was hard to find many equal opponents in the whole dark world. When 2 young men in the fire-flaming realm who had the strength to kill a thunder-shocking realm expert alone joined forces, they could almost wipe out all the people on the list. He drove straight in and swaggered off. He was swift and decisive, overbearing to the point of being unreasonable. Even the only thunder-shocking realm expert on the hunting list in this area of Changdao was killed in less than 3 minutes under the joint attack of Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. The whole Changdao was in a state of panic. In less than a week, there were 10 battles. Jiang Shangyu would fight in every battle, but he never used his full strength. When he hit his strength and was willing to assist, Li Tianlan could kill very comfortably in any battle. And what made him feel more comfortable was Jiang Shangyu's camouflage skills. Camouflage and lurking. This was Li Tianlan's shortcoming. In the Sky Academy, he had not even taken this course, which was taught by the Enchantress. His strength could definitely make him look down on his peers, but in terms of camouflage and lurking, almost all his peers could beat him. This was almost one of the main reasons why my Shiranui could chase him from Ninghu to Changdao. Jiang Shangyu was an expert in this aspect. He was a master. Before and after each battle, the 2 of them would change their appearances and wander around every corner of the city like ghosts. The continuous murders often gave the police in Changdao a splitting headache, but no one could track the whereabouts of Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. The two of them changed places almost every day. After the initial hustle and bustle, the police in Changdao seemed to be a little numb and lifeless. To be exact, the whole Changdao, the first city in the world to be bombed and rebuilt by nuclear weapons, was a little lifeless. The police were silent. Even my Shiranui seemed to be quiet after the failure that night. She seemed to have understood that she could not be a match for Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. Recently, it seemed that even the power to search for the two was less. While waiting for breakfast, the two sat face to face, looking at the rain outside the window, thinking quietly. "Do you want to try again?" Jiang Shangyu suddenly said in a soft tone. This young man, who didn't have the title of the Heavenly Son and didn't have the inheritance of the invincible realm, but he was likely to have the potential and even strength of the Heavenly Son, was very gentle when he smiled. After getting along with him for a few days, Li Tianlan had to admit that he was a wonderful person who couldn't make people feel bad even though he knew he was up to no good. He looked at Li Tianlan and smiled sincerely. "If you want, I'm willing to accompany you to the end." "Forget it." Li Tianlan shook his head. "It doesn't make sense." In the days when the whole East Island was lifeless, Li Tianlan didn't feel safe. Instead, as each day passed, he felt more and more nervous, as if he was surrounded by danger. That was his almost innate intuition, which kept reminding him to leave this seemingly safe place as soon as possible. Changdao was lifeless and calm. But in Li Tianlan's view, the whole Changdao seemed to have become a cage. A tightly guarded cage. For 3 days in a row, after getting rid of my Shiranui and killing all the people on the hunting list, he and Jiang Shangyu had been trying to leave Changdao. For 3 days, the two of them tried to leave the territory from different directions and meet up with the high-end combat power led by Tribulation. They tried 6 times in a row, but they failed every time. Highways, barren hills, jungles, docks. Tight dragnet. East Island seemed to have quietly surrounded the whole Changdao. Under the strict defense, the two of them suddenly found that they seemed to have been trapped in the city unconsciously. It was almost impossible to sneak out. Killing their way out was the only way. Killing their way out. It was a good idea. But it was also an untimely idea. Although Li Tianlan's current state did not affect his normal fighting, his injury was extremely serious. In his estimation, it would take at least 10 days for him to barely exert his peak strength. At that time, he would join forces with Jiang Shangyu to break out of the encirclement. That would be the best time. But everything was just as he had said. It didn't make sense. During the time when Changdao was locked up by the East Island officials, the whole territory of East Island had been in turmoil. Starting from Dongdu, Ninghu, Jubin, Jingzhong, Minjia, Wakayama. The whole East Island was in a killing frenzy like the end of the world. Every day in the media reports, the casualty rate of the important figures in East Island was rising. In the dark, there seemed to be a mysterious force appearing everywhere in East Island, sweeping the whole territory with a momentum that could sweep everything. And from the current situation, this force was most likely to converge in Changdao. Tribulation naturally didn't do it on purpose. Li Tianlan had got in touch with Bai Yuming and finally confirmed a piece of news. East Island seemed to be driving them away on purpose. In the scheme of Zhongzhou State, the first batch of elites sneaked into East Island was about 2,000 people. Including the chess pieces of Zhongzhou State lurking in East Island, there were about 2,500 people in total. And in the past week, East Island was completely crazy. It was not convenient for the officials to directly send out the army to encircle and annihilate them, but countless military superiors had quietly joined the pursuit camp. In a week, more than 400 elites of Zhongzhou State were buried in East Island. Nearly 1,000 people had been driven into Changdao by East Island's constant pursuit. At this point, the whole Zhongzhou State had no way back. Whether they were willing or not, in such a situation, everyone in Zhongzhou State had to gather in Changdao and then discuss the next battle plan, or to deal with the all-out counterattack of East Island that might come at any time. 6 days ago, the battle between the Master of Samsara Palace and the God of War of Zhongzhou State ended with the victory of the Master of Samsara Palace. The news spread all over the dark world. Along with this news, There was another more shocking news. Tianhai Wuji, the Wuji sword master of East Island, and Luxing Songqiuan, the Jifeng sword sage of East Island, teamed up to ask Wang Tianzong, the sword emperor of Zhongzhou state, for advice on swordsmanship, but they were completely defeated. The two great grandmasters of East Island were sincerely convinced. They had decided to stay in Zhongzhou state temporarily and ask Wang Tianzong, the sword emperor of Zhongzhou state, for advice on swordsmanship. Both of them were traveling in Zhongzhou state together. Quan Kong, the lord of fantasy world, and Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars, regretted not meeting the master of Samsara Palace earlier. Jiang Qinnian, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, was assisting in the investigation because he was involved in a secret case about the killing of a high-level official of Kunlun City. This was the official statement of Zhongzhou state. Humbly asking for advice, regretting not meeting earlier, drinking and chatting. Not to mention how ridiculous this news was, it was an indisputable fact that the 5 Invincible Realm experts who went to Zhongzhou state to watch the ceremony all lost contact in Zhongzhou state. And the fight in the Dark World, without official preparation, couldn't even be protested through diplomatic channels. Such official preparation also needed time and reasons. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Zhongzhou state had been famous for its eloquence since the founding of the country. When the other side found a reason to protest, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would respond, and then protest again, and then respond again. For Zhongzhou state, which had the initiative, this war of words could be played in any way it wanted. It was enough to play until the end of the East Island incident. At present, it was unknown what Knights Templars and the fantasy world would do, but the two great grandmasters of Invincible Realm were left in Zhongzhou state, and a large number of elites of Zhongzhou state went to East Island. The whole East Island had no choice. The final battle was imperative. Two great grandmasters of East Island, and countless elites and experts of the special warfare system of East Island lurking in Zhongzhou state. The more this kind of power was controlled by Zhongzhou state, the more chips Zhongzhou state had. As time went by, batch after batch of elites of Zhongzhou state entered East Island, and the whole East Island didn't even have the power to fight back in the end. So, the final battle. Only by catching all the elites of Zhongzhou state who sneaked into East Island in the final battle, and controlling the chips to talk with Zhongzhou state, East Island had the possibility to save the situation. Zhongzhou state had the power of the whole country. So did East Island now. And on its own home ground, East Island moved much faster than Zhongzhou state. In just a few days, it could be said that East Island had used all its power to investigate all the people lurking in Zhongzhou state crazily. They hunted them all the way. If they couldn't kill them, they drove them away. Changdao. Obviously, it was the place that East Island had chosen for the final battle. In decades, the biggest conflict between Zhongzhou state and East Island in the Dark World would completely break out and come to an end here. Whether this national plot could succeed or not, the Battle of Changdao would be the most crucial point. Now the prelude had been drawn, and they only needed to wait for the result. Should I find a chance to play? In the silence, Li Tianlan suddenly opened his mouth again, as if he was mumbling to himself, or asking Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu's eyes suddenly lit up, and he was about to speak. Outside the noodle house, the figure of a young man had already quietly walked in. This was a man in shabby clothes. He couldn't tell his age, and he couldn't even see his face clearly. He wore a faded top hat, a thin and dirty windbreaker, and carried a black travel bag. He slowly sat in another corner of the noodle house. In Jiang Shangyu's sight, he could only see his side face and the old red scarf around his neck that violated the current weather. In an instant, Jiang Shangyu's pupils suddenly shrank. What's wrong? Li Tianlan, who turned his head out of the window, glanced at Jiang Shangyu and asked casually. Jiang Shangyu had already lowered his head and lit a cigarette. When he raised his head again, his expression had completely returned to normal. Nothing. He took a deep drag on the cigarette and said with a smile. Indeed nothing. Anyway, it was none of his business. It was Li Tianlan who was in trouble. At this moment, Jiang Shangyu could be sure that Li Tianlan was in trouble. And deadly trouble. Chapter 166. After eating a bowl of steaming fish ball noodles, Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu went straight back to the nearby hotel. The hotel with no stars was more like a small hotel on the side of the road. It was not shabby, but very simple. The two of them booked 2 rooms and lived in seclusion and safety. Jiang Shangyu's appearance made Li Tianlan vigilant, but he had to admit that his appearance did make up for his shortcomings. It was not the shortcoming of combat power, but the insufficiency of disguise. At least Jiang Shangyu could speak Japanese fluently, which was something that Li Tianlan could not catch up with in a short time. Now Jiang Shangyu and he disguised as a pair of brothers with a similar age difference. The elder brother was more talkative, while the younger brother was mute. This disguise was not necessarily flawless, but on the one hand, their disguise time was very short. On the other hand, according to the principle of changing places every 2 or 3 days, in a short time, they did not need to worry about being exposed. The two of them walked into the lobby of the hotel one after the other. The young Japanese woman who was working at the front desk looked up at them, blushed, and greeted them in soft Japanese with a coquettish voice. Li Tianlan looked at Jiang Shangyu expressionlessly. Then he turned and walked into the elevator without saying a word. Jiang Shangyu, who looked delicate and clean, gave people a gentle but firm feeling, walked into the front desk with a smile and stood in front of the woman whose legs seemed to be a little weak. Turning the corner, Li Tianlan casually looked back. Jiang Shangyu had already put his hand into the front desk girl's overalls with a smile. The girl's face, which was not very beautiful but delicate and quiet, was a little flushed. Her charming eyes were like silk, but she looked around in panic. But her body bent slightly, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to cooperate with Jiang Shangyu's play. The two of them looked at each other. In an instant of embarrassment, Li Tianlan's figure had already walked into the elevator. It was still difficult for him to adapt to the rich and colorful life in the dark world. For nearly a week, his life was like an ascetic, meditating, eating, sleeping, and rushing. However, Jiang Shangyu's life was really colorful. In less than 3 days in this hotel, 3 women, including the landlady, who were somewhat attractive in some aspects, had entered Jiang Shangyu's room one after another. The so-called having fun every night was just like that. The girl at the front desk downstairs had screamed in Jiang Shangyu's room for half the night last night, and didn't go out until dawn. Besides enjoying such a romantic life, the two of them also got some information. At least in the case that the landlady was in Jiang Shangyu's big bed. Jiang Shangyu had basically completely grasped some of the guest information in the hotel, the daily patrol pattern of the police, some rumors circulating among the people, and so on. These seemingly unimportant little details were crucial to their lurking. There was no one in the hotel who could threaten their safety. The police patrols did not detect any abnormalities. Under such circumstances, Jiang Shangyu's proposal to stay for 1 more day was approved by Li Tianlan. Although he thought that the reason why he stayed for 1 more day was that he didn't have enough fun with the landlady's plump and enchanting body. But who cared? As long as he wasn't discovered, it didn't matter. He returned to his room. Meditation. About an hour later, there was a knock on the door. Li Tianlan got up and opened the door. Outside the door, Jiang Shangyu stood at the door with a refreshed face, smiled, and gestured to the room. Li Tianlan let him in, and waved his hand slightly. The air in the room suddenly began to distort, completely isolating all the sounds inside. Jiang Shangyu raised his eyebrows slightly and turned back to look at Li Tianlan. He chuckled and said, "Senior brother Li, your injury seems to be a little better." "It's not a fatal injury. The human body has the self-healing function." Li Tianlan lit a cigarette and said calmly. There was no reason for his injury not to heal quickly. A whole set of immortality potions worked perfectly on him. The huge vitality continuously supported his physical strength. The speed of his injury recovery was completely stunning. It was no exaggeration to say that every minute, his condition would be better. After a few days of peace, his injury had almost recovered by half. The immortality series of the Wang family of Beihai is really something against the natural order. Jiang Shangyu sighed with emotion. Everyone knew why the master of Samsara Palace went straight to Mount Dibbing for Li Tianlan. The immortality series, which few people in the Wang family of Beihai had used for hundreds of years, almost every time it appeared, It meant that the Wang family of Beihai had encountered great difficulties. This precious treasure was now used on Li Tianlan. This kind of opportunity really made people jealous. He looked at Li Tianlan, shook his head, and said with a self-deprecating smile, "It seems that I don't have a chance to kill you this time." Li Tianlan took a deep look at Jiang Shangyu and didn't speak. Among the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State, the Jiang family was an important part of the Prince Group. But in recent years, it was getting closer and closer to the Special Warfare Group. Jiang Shan, the current patriarch of the Jiang family, a member of the Zhongzhou State Decision-Making Committee, and the top leader of Beijiang Province, used to be an old subordinate of Gu Xingyun. In the Prince Group, Jiang Shan had always been one of the leaders who opposed the gradual alienation from the Special Warfare Group. Not to mention the future of the Jiang family. At least now, Jiang Shangyu was the veritable #1 expert of the young generation in the Prince Group. He was a terrible figure who only exposed the exquisite bone, but hid his most powerful weapon. Qin Weibai said that Jiang Shangyu had the Heavenly King heart. This was definitely an extremely secretive thing, and even only Jiang Shan and Jiang Shangyu, father and son, knew about it. Li Tianlan didn't know how Qin Weibai knew about it, but he would never doubt her words. The Heavenly King heart and the exquisite bone. This was simply a veritable Heavenly Son's qualification. But for many years, Jiang Shangyu had always been steady and steady. Among the top 10 experts of the young generation in Zhongzhou State, Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan stood side by side. Although Jiang Shangyu's ranking was prominent enough, he was in the shadow of the first 2 people. He was so low-key that no one seemed to know much about him. Not to mention other things, just in terms of his will, how many people in the young generation could match him? In terms of shrewdness, Jiang Shangyu was almost the most terrible young man Li Tianlan had ever seen. Li Tianlan might not be afraid to make an enemy of such a person. But when he thought about it, it was not very comfortable after all. What on earth is Phoenix Pavilion? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. This was the question he had been thinking about for the past few days. Jiang Shangyu wanted to kill him because of Phoenix Pavilion. To be exact, it was because of a woman in this unknown organization. Li Tianlan knew nothing about this unknown organization. Qin Weibai obviously knew something, but it was also obvious that she didn't want to say more. Li Tianlan was also a little helpless about this. Although he knew that it was unlikely to get the answer from Jiang Shangyu, he couldn't help but ask again. If there is a chance, senior brother will know. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes, and a cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. What? Want to fight? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, and his smile was a little cold. I know there is no chance now. Jiang Shangyu's expression immediately returned to normal. Maybe a few days ago, when senior brother was at his weakest, I could have had a try, but I was bluffed by you at that time. These days, your injury is getting better every day. Maybe now I am no longer a match for senior brother. Li Tianlan was silent. Jiang Shangyu had the Heavenly King heart that could steadily enter the invincible realm, and he had the exquisite bone. It sounded scary, but a fatal shortcoming could not be ignored. Li Tianlan himself was from the Li family. Wang Shengxiao was from the Wang family of Beihai. Gu Hanshan was from Kunlun City. Each of these 3 places had the core unique skills that supported them to stand proudly in the dark world for hundreds of years. The 6 paths of reincarnation sword of the Wang family of Beihai was known as the strongest outbreak in the entire dark world. The 10 skills of true martial arts of Kunlun City represented the strongest domain of the invincible realm. The 24 moves of Sword of the Li family had the strongest sword intent that could tear everything and break everything. What about the Jiang family? The Jiang family was also prominent now, but compared with these 3 giants that had been passed down for hundreds of years, the Jiang family had no foundation at all, especially in martial arts. They didn't even have a master of the invincible realm. For the Jiang family, Jiang Shangyu was not an inheritor, but a starting point. If he could grow up decades later, when he entered the invincible realm, and left a unique skill that could shock the world, after many years, maybe the Jiang family would have the opportunity to become a family force like the Wang family of Beihai. But at least for now, Jiang Shangyu of the Jiang family had a fatal shortcoming in unique skills. Jiang Shangyu seemed to have noticed this, so his martial arts progress was extremely slow, and he hadn't even reached the peak of the fire-flaming realm. The slow progress of martial arts also seemed to show that he had a solid and chilling foundation. Jiang Shangyu was so forbearing. Did he also want to imitate the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai and create a near-eternal hegemony? Li Tianlan sighed slightly in his heart. One tried to start. The other tried to recover. From this point of view, the two really shouldn't be enemies. If Jiang Shangyu didn't die this time, maybe the news that he had the Heavenly King heart would be exposed, and Jiang Shangyu himself would be in constant trouble. A thought flashed through Li Tianlan's mind subconsciously, and then he shook his head slightly. Qin Weibai had this information but kept it a secret. Obviously there was a reason. Before she could completely see the general trend of Zhongzhou state, it might be more useful to keep this secret that Jiang Shangyu thought no one else knew in his hand. I'm curious. Seeing that Li Tianlan seemed to be distracted, Jiang Shangyu chuckled and said, I wonder how senior brother Li will compare with Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan if you recover from your injury? Li Tianlan raised his eyelids and glanced at him. He didn't speak, but subconsciously made a comparison in his heart. His current real realm was actually just the ice-condensing realm. Recently, he had been fighting and fleeing constantly, which kept his spirit in a state of tension. After a few days of meditation, he was sure that he could enter the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm in the near future. With the effect of the potion, his combat capability could be maintained at the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. With such strength, facing Wang Shengxiao, who had entered the thunder-shocking realm, in different states, there would be completely different results. In an ordinary fight, it was almost impossible for him to be Wang Shengxiao's opponent. But if they fought to the death, there would also be two results. First, no one could do anything to the other, and second, they would die together. As for Gu Hanshan, who had the Heavenly King heart, Li Tianlan shook his head subconsciously. Gu Hanshan hadn't entered the thunder-shocking realm, but for him now, he was still an extremely difficult opponent. And Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan laughed at himself. He was also a character who was not easy to deal with. Maybe when he really entered the fire-flaming realm again, these opponents would be a different situation. Senior brother, you're not a match for them? Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Tianlan's expression and asked calmly. Yeah. Li Tianlan answered perfunctorily. Looking at Jiang Shangyu, he suddenly asked, Do you dare to play with me? Ha! Jiang Shangyu's eyes flashed and he said with a smile, Senior brother, how do you want to play? Don't you think Changdao is too quiet now? Li Tianlan squinted, and his smile was complicated. I've been quiet for too long since I was a child, so I like lively places. Jiang Shangyu suddenly thought of the dazzling red scarf that he had encountered not long ago. He looked at Li Tianlan, and a trace of hot but extremely cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. Then as you wish. Chapter 167. In the evening, Li Tianlan finally got in touch with Bai Yuming again. When all the elites of Zhongzhou state who sneaked into East Island were being hunted down, this seemingly simple thing was not easy at all. Li Tianlan had only contacted Bai Yuming once during the nearly 1 week he had been hiding in Changdao. After Tianhai Wuji, Luxing Sangchuan, and a large number of special warfare elites of East Island were trapped in Zhongzhou state, East Island took out the extremely rare high-pressure measures in recent decades. Although it seemed that this was still limited to the conflict in the Dark World, East Island, which had the home advantage, could use inexhaustible resources. Satellite monitoring, search system, intelligence force were concentrated, all the hidden cards in East Island were played, and a large number of masters of various systems entered the special warfare system to join the battle. In its own territory, if the National Will wanted to do something, basically nothing could not be done. So when Bai Yuming and others were being hunted, every time they got in touch with them, it was equal to increasing the risk of exposure for both sides. And this time, it was Bai Yuming who took the initiative to contact Li Tianlan. The phone rang when Li Tianlan was about to go out for dinner. Seeing the caller ID, Li Tianlan closed the door without hesitation and answered the phone. Tianlan. On the other end of the phone, Bai Yoming's tired voice sounded, with a trace of irrepressible irritation. How are you? Not bad. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then opened the closed curtains and looked out of the window. It was still raining in Changdao. The rain covered the twilight, and the pedestrians hurried past on the street. It was a cold and quiet scene, nothing unusual. For the time being, I'm safe here. Well, Bai Yuming muttered, seeming to be a little hesitant. But Li Tianlan went straight to the point. He knew how precious the current call time was, so he asked directly, Sister Bai, how are you? What can I do for you here? After a short silence, Bai Yuming finally smiled unabashedly. Her voice was hoarse and tired, and Li Tianlan could even imagine how terrible the face of the young lady of the Bai family was. I'm in a bad situation here. 12 hours ago, I was separated from Yi Fengcheng. Nearly 50 of the 200 elites followed me out of Jubin, and now we are about 300 kilometers away from Changdao. As for the others, the situation is not much better. East Island's local power is too strong, and many of us were separated. Tribulation is still watching Shinichi Miyamoto on Fu Peak. Our forces are too scattered now. Li Tianlan obviously frowned and his heart sank. Bai Yuming was one of the high-level commanders who sneaked into East Island this time. But obviously, her current situation couldn't represent the whole force. To put it bluntly, all the elites who sneaked into East Island had been broken up into countless small forces, and there was no whole existence. The special warfare system of East Island's special warfare system was to encircling a large number of people, and it was two completely different. And the pursuit was still going on. Li Tianlan didn't forget the dragnet around the whole Changdao. There were still many obstacles on the way for Bai Yuming and the others. The special warfare system of East Island chased them all the way. And when the elites of Zhongzhou State were chased into Changdao, how many of the 2,000 elites would be left? Sister Bai, do you have any news about Beitian and Qiancheng? Li Tianlan was silent for a while, and suddenly asked again. Not yet. Bai Yoming's voice was getting lower and lower. Li Tianlan suddenly felt irritated again. In this week he got in touch with Bai Yuming, Tribulation, and even Yi Fengcheng. But Li Baiqian's team of 6 people was the only one he couldn't get in touch with. Like Jiang Shangyu, Li Baiqian's team was the second group of participants in the hunting operation, and they were responsible for hunting some relatively less important people on the list. Less than 12 hours after Li Tianlan left, they also left the Azure Pool Hot Spring Club. Li Beitian, Ning Qiancheng, Su Chu Yu Qingyan Yi Huayu, and Dongqing Rushi who acted with them. The 6 of them had been missing for nearly a week. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the negative emotions that kept surging in his heart, and asked directly, Sister Bai, what do you need me to do? I have a map here. It was exchanged by Director Han after sacrificing more than a dozen elites in Changdao. Tianlan, everyone is in a bad situation now, and our strength is too scattered. When we finally rush into Changdao, we will face the tight encirclement outside Changdao, and we will definitely suffer heavy casualties. So we hope you can do something for Zhongzhou State. Even if we can reduce the casualties of our elites, it will be good. Bai Yuming said softly. Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly lit up. That map. It's the current defense map of Changdao, and the strength evaluation of some related experts. Tianlan, I know you are with Jiang Shangyu. If you two act together, you can help us a lot. And we will also report this achievement to the military of Zhongzhou State and Kunlun City, and then... Sister Bai, you don't have to say so much. Li Tianlan took the initiative to interrupt Bai Yuming. In fact, that's what we are going to do. It's just that we are still collecting information about the defense of Changdao. Jiang Shangyu and I were going to test the water tonight. If we have the map in your hand, it will be much more convenient for us to do things. If that's the case, it couldn't be better. There was finally a hint of joy in Bai Yoming's voice, and then her tone became cautious. But Tianlan, you must remember to act according to your capabilities. Even if you can only create some slight chaos for them, it is self-evident that it will help us. Li Tianlan agreed. In fact, he didn't need Bai Yuming to say this, because he knew how valuable his life was. But in this way, once Bai Yuming and others entered Changdao, wouldn't it be exactly what East Island wanted? Sister Bai, are we really going to use Changdao as the place of the final battle? Li Tianlan asked in a low voice. Bai Yuming seemed to be stunned, and then she sighed slightly and said calmly, "We have no choice, just like the elites of East Island are in Huiting. Changdao is the place chosen by East Island for the final battle. We have to go there even if we don't want to. Now the situation is complicated, and the direction of Changdao is the only direction where we can survive. If we don't go there, where can we go? But now we are scattered, and our resistance is very weak. East Island may have decided to kill us all on the way, but they didn't reserve too much power in Changdao, so now Changdao, which is chosen as the battlefield by East Island, is also the best way for us to escape. We have to go there even if we don't want to." She pretended to be relaxed and smiled, and continued, "If this is a war, now you and Jiang Shangyu are the vanguard going deep into the enemy's rear. Tianlan, be careful. You must be careful." Li Tianlan nodded and said yes. "Don't worry, our situation will get better soon. The Battle of Zhongzhou State has been over for a long time, and all the dark superpowers should make up their minds." Bai Yuming said again, and then hung up the phone. A few seconds later, a high-definition map was directly sent to Li Tianlan's mobile phone. Li Tianlan looked at the map silently, deep in thought. All the dark superpowers should also make up their minds? Indeed. After the Battle of Zhongzhou State ended, there was no need to hide the plot of Zhongzhou State. The two invincible realm superiors, and a large number of elites of East Island were trapped in Zhongzhou State. Now the special warfare system of East Island was in an unprecedentedly weak state. Even some of East Island's allies might not let go of such an opportunity. Not only the Dark World, but also the allies in any field were united because of interests. It was not strange for them to turn against each other for interests. The interests didn't matter whether they were enemies or allies, as long as they were interests. When East Island was empty inside, all the superpowers took advantage of the weakness and turned the special warfare system of East Island into a chaotic dark pattern similar to that of Northern Europe. This was a good situation for all the dark superpowers. All the people in the world attacked East Island together. If that was the case, their situation would be much better. Facing the power of the whole dark world, no matter how arrogant East Island was, it had to have scruples. There was a soft knock on the door. Li Tianlan opened the door and looked at Jiang Shangyu, who was standing outside. Before he spoke, Li Tianlan nodded and signaled him to come in. Jiang Shangyu walked in with some confusion. He looked at Li Tianlan and said in confusion, "What's wrong?" "Look at this first." Li Tianlan handed over the map on his mobile phone. "I just got in touch with Sister Bai. This is the defense map of the periphery of Changdao. Let's study it and take action tonight." As he spoke, a trace of killing intent flashed in his eyes, hot and firm. The surprise flashed on Jiang Shangyu's face. He looked down at the mobile phone screen. He zoomed in and out of the map on the mobile phone, and looked back and forth for nearly 10 minutes. Then he chuckled and said, "This map is very detailed. It even marks the people who need to be killed. We just need to call the names on the list. How much effort can we save?" "It's not that easy to call the names," Li Tianlan said calmly. "Look at the map first. How many superiors of the thunder-shocking realm are there? Except for a few tricky ones, the rest can basically be risked." Jiang Shangyu shook his head and said calmly, "Your 24 moves of sword is unparalleled in the world. With me, we can definitely give everyone a surprise if we cooperate." Li Tianlan was about to speak, but he suddenly looked up. He narrowed his eyes slightly and stared at Jiang Shangyu in front of him. Jiang Shangyu's expression was calm, but there was a hint of playfulness in his eyes. 24 moves of sword? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. "You are indeed the successor of the Li family." Jiang Shangyu stared at Li Tianlan and said thoughtfully, "In this case, Gu Hanshan has a mortal enemy, and Wang Shengxiao's life will not be easy." Li Tianlan looked at Jiang Shangyu in silence and suddenly said, "How do you know?" "I didn't think about it before. After all, the Li family has been quiet for too long." Jiang Shangyu shook his head and said, "But the battle between the master of Samsara Palace and the governor of Kunlun City reminded the whole dark world that your relationship with Samsara is not a secret. In this way, it is reasonable to guess your identity. I think now I am not the only one who has the same guess. Other forces also have the same suspicion. It's just that I'm sure now. Li Tianlan was a little lost in thought. His heart kept sinking, and he had begun to imagine the consequences of his identity being exposed. A sharp murderous intent suddenly appeared beside him. Li Tianlan was shocked. In an instant he switched places with the shadow. When he appeared again, he was already behind Jiang Shangyu. At that moment, Jiang Shangyu had quietly taken a step forward. He was less than a meter away from the shadow. Since you know my identity, you should know that I am a mortal enemy of Kunlun City and the so-called Phoenix Pavilion. Even if you do it for a woman in Phoenix Pavilion, it has nothing to do with me. Do you still want to kill me? Li Tianlan frowned, but his eyes had become completely cold. Why does it have nothing to do with me if we are mortal enemies? Chapter 168. It was still raining in Changdao at night. The light raindrops fell to the ground in the wind. In the late night air, everything around seemed to be a little bit cooler. The mountain forest was slightly undulating in the wind and rain. Occasionally, some leaves fell with the wind. The sky was dark and gloomy. Walking in the forest at night, an indescribable sense of gloom and belonging lingered in one's heart like a shadow and never dissipated. In the grass that was covered with rainwater, a resolute figure was holding the sniper rifle in his hand with concentration. The black muzzle of the rifle poked out of the grass. His attention was completely focused as he carefully observed everything in his line of sight through the sniper scope. Position 16 is safe. In the dark, he gently wiped the rain off his face and said softly in Japanese, "Position 17 is safe. 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 Safe." A series of silent reports came from the familiar voice. In the grass, the sniper's eyes flashed and he continued, "Be careful to hide." He reached out his hand and gently stroked the sniper rifle in his hand. His careful and gentle movement was like stroking his lover, and he couldn't let go of it. This was a sniper rifle that was rarely used in the military of East Island. It was more of a cannon than a gun. Its caliber of nearly 50 millimeters was enough to prove its terrifying power. This kind of gun or cannon was codenamed Holy Thunder in East Island. It could be said that it was the most powerful weapon that the Special Warfare System of East Island could equip its elites in batches. Holy Thunder was nearly 3 meters long and extremely heavy. It was undoubtedly a little inconvenient on the battlefield where snipers needed to move flexibly. But the heavy gun body and the great power made some sharpshooters who were confident in their marksmanship in East Island like it. Holy Thunder could only shoot 3 bullets in 5 minutes, but its superpower was enough to break the ice layer condensed by an ice-condensing realm expert with all his strength. This was a real killing weapon. But its shortcomings were as obvious as its advantages. Because of the excessive emphasis on power, Holy Thunder's shooting speed was so slow that many people couldn't accept it. All kinds of data showed that Holy Thunder's shooting speed could only reach half the speed of an ordinary sniper rifle. This speed was also fast, but it gave the opponent at least half a second to consider when dealing with an expert, which also tested the shooter's reaction speed and prediction accuracy. However, the reason why the Divine Thunder could be called a cannon was naturally not because of its ridiculously large body, but because of the Divine Thunder's lethality. The moment the bullet exploded, it could cover an area of at least 15 meters around it. Even an ordinary expert in the fire-flaming realm might be injured by a shot. In any case, this kind of gun, which had obvious advantages and disadvantages, was a real treasure in the whole of East Island. Except for the real elites, no one else could use it. He gently stroked the body of the gun, and recalled the scene a few hours ago when he pulled the trigger and blew up the head of a woman 400 meters away. The ice wall was shattered by that shot, and the bullet pierced through the skull. Fresh blood and brain matter burst out together with the rain. The entire scene was filled with an extremely cold and ruthless feeling. It was said that they were elites of the special warfare system of Zhengzhou State. A few women. The stupid Sheena Sao actually wanted to rush over to take revenge. What a joke. She seems to be a very young woman. I wonder what she tastes like. As his thoughts ran wild, Another shadow flashed in the corner of his sniping scope. His attention was suddenly focused, and he looked forward through the sniper scope. In his sight, the darkness was drifting away gently. In front of him, there was nothing but the falling rain and flying leaves. Was there something wrong with his eyes? He subconsciously turned the muzzle and looked around, hesitating whether or not he should sound a warning. "Here you are." A soft, almost murmuring voice sounded gloomily in his ear. Abruptly and without any warning, the sniper in the grass shivered obviously. When he was highly focused, he was suddenly frightened. His first reaction was not to sound a warning, but to scream out of instinct. A palm had already reached over and covered his mouth. The palm squeezed his mouth tightly, and a silver dagger was almost stabbed into his throat at the same time. Puff. The blade of the dagger was slightly longer, and the tip of the knife went straight through his neck. Blood sprayed, and the dagger with cold light was suddenly retracted. Bang! In less than a second, a gunshot that shook the whole mountain forest suddenly sounded. The light of the silver dagger disappeared, and the figure disappeared at the same time. The bullet whistled from another direction and landed on number 16's position like a cannonball. Within a radius of more than 10 meters, all the grass was uprooted immediately. Number 16's body, which was not completely dead, was swallowed by the fire and turned into a pile of ashes in an instant. The whole mountain forest seemed to be completely alarmed. The gunshot thought for a moment and then disappeared. There was no report, no curse, only silence, as if the divine thunder had accidentally gone off because it was out of control. Charge, change direction, move forward, change position. The rain all over the sky tilted forward as he moved forward. There seemed to be a sudden storm sweeping through the mountain forest, and a shadow had already approached the second sniper like a ghost. "Number 7, damn it, what are you doing?" Swoosh. Before the second sniper could finish his words, a silver light suddenly flashed, and the shining dagger had directly pierced his head. The dagger was quickly pulled out. Before the blood that sprayed upward fell to the ground, the figure that did not seem to stop at all had already approached the third sniper. The slaughter in the night was like cutting grass. "You're too slow," Li Tianlan said in a very calm tone. "Senior brother Jiang, are you a tortoise? A tortoise race with a hare? I like this story. If I were the tortoise in the story, I wouldn't mind." Puff. In his sight, the third sniper had already realized that something was wrong. He suddenly jumped out of the grass and intended to change his sniping position, but Li Tianlan's figure had already arrived in front of him. The two sides crossed each other in the darkness. In the whistling wind, the third sniper's chest suddenly sprayed a line of blood 2 or 3 meters long. Bang! In another direction, another gunshot sounded, but it instantly missed. "You're willing to be a tortoise, but I'm not interested in being a rabbit." In the calm voice, the dagger instantly turned into a double sword. The sword light lit up, and the crisscrossed sword intent rushed into the forest. Another sniper had just turned around, and his body was directly torn in half by the sword energy. The fourth one. Bang bang bang. With Li Tianlan's calm voice, at least 3 sniper rifles around him shot at him at the same time. Fire, explosion. The divine thunder kept roaring, and a deep pit was blown up within a radius of tens of meters. "The power is good, but do you want to kill me with these useless hands? Then you're bound to lose." The sword edge flashed in the air. Another head flew into the sky. The fifth. The moment the gunshot sounded, the converged sword edge suddenly shook, and the surrounding air suddenly twisted. The head in the air was crushed into a bloody mist by the twisted air before it fell to the ground. The sword intent condensed and did not disperse. Like a snow-white waterfall, it rushed over a distance of hundreds of meters in an instant. The whole mountain forest was silent for a moment. "Well, the 6th one." Li Tianlan's tone was cold. "Senior brother Jiang, you're too slow. Remember our bet. If I win, you must tell me what Phoenix Pavilion is and about my father." "I just said I would think about it." Jiang Shangyu's tone was calm. Li Tianlan smiled, but his eyes were full of cold killing intent. Although he was curious about Phoenix Pavilion, he did not intend to deliberately investigate it. But today, Jiang Shangyu's rhetorical question almost completely messed up his mind. Phoenix Pavilion? His father's death? Was there a relationship between the two? Jiang Shangyu did not say it clearly. He seemed to be deliberately leading him to do something, but Li Tianlan had no choice. Regardless of whether what Jiang Shangyu said was true or not, at least for now, he had to take this as a clue. Now this bet was also proposed by Li Tianlan. The competition was the number and speed of killing tonight. The winner had the right to make a request to the loser, and Li Tianlan's request was to make Jiang Shangyu spit out everything about his father and Phoenix Pavilion. He did not even expect Jiang Shangyu to agree to this matter. But for some reason, Jiang Shangyu hesitated and actually agreed. Although he only said he would think about it, and although Li Tianlan noticed something wrong at that moment, since the bet could be made, he had no reason not to win. Killing. Killing as fast as possible. The 7th one. The 8th one. On the other side of the jungle, Jiang Shangyu was also moving. His speed seemed to be much slower than Li Tianlan's. In Li Tianlan's hands, when the 8th sniper fell, the 5th one was beside him. However, his expression was still calm. His gaze occasionally shifted as he observed his surroundings without batting an eyelid. Still not making a move? So cautious? Now he should be at his fastest speed. How long do you want to observe? As he spoke, he shook his fists hard and directly smashed the head of the 6th sniper. The forest in front of them was surrounded by a main national highway into Changdao. On both sides were hillsides and forests. At the foot of the mountain, East Island had set up a temporary and obscure headquarters. About 600 East Island elites were gathered here. There were less than 50 people in the headquarters, and the rest of them were scattered into the forest, making a nearly 20-kilometer-long path in the forest. If there were really elites of Zhongzhou State breaking into Changdao here, the hundreds of snipers in the forest would definitely be the most difficult point to deal with. This was also the main goal of Jiang Shangyu and Li Tianlan tonight. In addition to the main goal, the two also wanted to try to see if they could kill Nani Xiao, the commander of this area. Nani Xiao, the captain of East Island's Hanzhou Special Warfare Brigade, held the rank of lieutenant general, was in charge of everything in the special warfare system of Hanzhou Island. His status was similar to that of the director of the Provincial Special Operations Bureau of Zhongzhou State. However, East Island only had 3 big islands, and Nani Xiao could be in charge of one of them. His status was still higher than that of dozens of directors of the Special Operations Bureau of Zhongzhou State, and his strength was naturally higher. He was an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm. In the entire special warfare system of East Island, Nani Xiao could be said to be one of the well-deserved giants, whether in strength or status. In the current defense of East Island in Changdao, there were more than 10 experts of the thunder-shocking realm, and Nani Xiao was definitely one of the toughest bones. Nani Xiao sat in the headquarters. It would take him at least 5 minutes to go up and down the mountain. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu planned to kill nearly 100 snipers in the forest with 2 or 3 rounds of harassment, and then they would join forces to besiege Nani Xiao. Even if they couldn't kill him, it would be a good result to make him seriously injured. As long as this defense line was loosened, it would be much easier to break into Changdao from here in the near future. The 15th. Li Tianlan's cold voice continued to ring. The 9th sniper in front of him fell down. Jiang Shangyu casually made a secret signal on a thick tree around him. Bai Yuming actually gave them 2 tasks. The first was to hunt. Just like what they were doing now, they tried their best to disrupt the defense line of Changdao so that the elites of Zhongzhou State could break out. The second was to unite. When everyone rushed into Changdao, countless people formed small groups, and it was extremely difficult to contact each other. It was also very difficult to gather these people together again. If they couldn't gather in Changdao, so many small groups would be annihilated by the East Island officials sooner or later. The 16th. Jiang Shangyu sighed slightly and looked around. It was still quiet. He sighed softly and said to himself, "You missed the best opportunity." He took a deep breath and said softly, "Let's go." Looking at the time, Nani Xiao is probably coming. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then said, "Gather at the predetermined place and wait for the next action." "You're leaving?" Before Nani Xiao came, in the grass less than a kilometer away from Li Tianlan, A black figure aimed at Li Tianlan through the sniper scope. He sighed slightly and said, "What a pity." The black figure lay in the grass, perfectly integrated with the darkness and the grass. He lay motionless and watched Li Tianlan's figure disappear through the sniper scope. A playful smile gradually appeared on his face. "But I've probably observed your shooting pattern, little guy. So you're going to die." In the wind and rain, he slightly pressed down the top hat on his head, and at the same time, pulled the old red scarf around his neck. 2 guns were quietly placed beside him, one long and one short. One looked ferocious, the other simple. In the entire dark world, these 2 famous guns could be said to be famous. Although they were not murderous weapons, they seemed to be not much worse than the 12 murderous weapons. It was hard to say whether these 2 guns made the gun king of the dark world, or the gun king of the dark world made these 2 guns. In the eyes of everyone in the dark world, this man and these guns were completely one. Famous gun whisper. Famous gun grim smile. In the darkness, the hand pulling the red scarf gently fell on the long gun. His eyes left the sniper scope, shining with calm and clear brilliance like cold stars in the night. Li Tianlan's figure had disappeared. He stood up from the bushes and followed them without batting an eyelid. In the dark world, no one knew his name. The Gun King, who could suppress a group of thundershocking realm experts on the killer list with his superb marksmanship and 2 famous guns, was now ranked 5th on the killer list. His code name was Heavenly Calamity. Chapter 169. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. The whole mountain forest suddenly boiled with this fierce and swift raid. A large number of East Island elites rushed into the mountain forest and kept wandering in the forest. Whether it was East Island plotting against Zhongzhou State or Zhongzhou State plotting against East Island, this operation could be said to be a conflict in the dark world. It was not suitable for East Island to send troops to encircle and suppress them, but a large number of military superiors temporarily joined the special warfare system of East Island, which made East Island extremely abundant in manpower for a while. Changdao was not a small place. According to the map sent by Han Shixuan, there were at least 20 points around Changdao. With the nearby national highway as the core, this line of defense with a radius of more than 10 kilometers was just one of the points. This point was not even the one with the largest number of people. But this was not the one with the largest number of people. There were nearly 600 elites, the elites measured by the national level. Each of them was at least in the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm, which was not something ordinary soldiers could compare with. In just a few minutes, after more than 20 snipers fell silent one by one, all the elites suddenly moved as fast as they could. The mountain forest began to boil. Compared to the vast area of the mountain forest, the hundreds of people who suddenly appeared in the mountain forest were actually not many, but they moved extremely fast. They were the real elites. Once they took action, the whole mountain forest seemed to be filled with shadows and murderous intent in an instant. Li Tianlan ran wildly in the mountain forest along the way he came, leaving the falling rain and trees behind him. This road was the safest now. When he came here, there were a lot of hidden posts, but they had been cleared. Because he and Jiang Shangyu moved too fast, in just a few minutes, they directly retreated before the other side could react. The whole road could be said to be flat and peaceful. To be exact, East Island set up a total of 17 points of defense in Changdao, and the mountain forest that Nani Xiu was in charge of was one of them. There were not many people, but because Nani Xiu was a superior who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm, it could be said to be one of the most difficult points to deal with. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu's plan was very simple. They intended to use 2 days to cause great chaos in this extremely critical defense point. On the first day, they naturally killed nearly 100 snipers here. Holy Thunder could be said to be the most famous killing weapon in the East Island military. A single one could pose a certain degree of threat to a fire-flaming realm expert. When a large number of Holy Thunders were concentrated and fired at the same time, even a thundershocking realm expert couldn't escape. At this time, there were at least 30 Holy Thunders in this forest, and dozens of sniper rifles with slightly less power. If all these people were killed, the casualty rate of the elites of Zhongzhou state breaking out from here would be greatly reduced. On the first day he would kill the sniper here. On the second day he would try to assassinate Nani Xiao. At the very least, he would be seriously injured. If this plan could be successfully completed, then Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu's task of destroying this key point would be considered completed. Their mission was to hunt and kill, and their main goal was to create as much chaos as possible in some key defense points, reducing the pressure on their compatriots to break out of the encirclement, and not to kill everyone in these defense points. And they couldn't do it. Even if 100 people besieged Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan wouldn't be able to escape, not to mention that there were 600 elites above the ice-condensing realm at this point at this time. 100 elites in the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm gathered together. In the drizzling weather, the power of these 100 people could almost instantly condense an ice wall with a thickness of more than 100 meters. With a thickness of more than 100 meters, it was definitely more exaggerated and solid than any so-called solid fortress or city wall in history. Li Tianlan had wind and thunder veins, but he wasn't an immortal. No matter how sharp his sword intent was, no matter how hot his flame was, and even if he had 10 wind and thunder veins in his body, it was impossible to completely destroy this 100-meter thick ice wall in an instant. Moreover, once real martial arts masters fought, it would often be a chaotic scene of light and shadow, flying sword intent, ice and fire intertwining, air and lightning lingering. The scene looked gorgeous and chaotic, and the destructive power was also extremely shocking. But at the end of the day, whether it was the chi-controlling realm, the ice-condensing realm, or the fire-flaming realm or the thunder-shocking realm, those seemingly gorgeous means of attack were actually substances that vibrated in the air with human strength. The chi-controlling realm vibrated the air with physical strength. The ice-condensing realm instantly condensed the moisture in the air with physical strength. The fire-flaming realm evaporated the moisture in the air and started a fire with tyrannical strength in the dry air by friction. To put it bluntly, this seemingly magical thing only relied on two things: great power, focused will. If one's power was not strong enough, he couldn't enter the 4 realms of martial arts. If one's will was not focused enough, he couldn't enter the 4 realms of martial arts either. The moment a master attacked, there would be ice and fire, which were the best embodiment of their absolute power and focus will. As for power and will, they were consumables. Although they could be replenished, if they were consumed too much at once in a short time, it would still have a fatal impact on their combat effectiveness. With Li Tianlan's current strength, the siege of 100 ice-condensing realm elites, even without considering the desperate thickness of the ice wall, could drag Li Tianlan to the point where he seriously lacked both power and will. At that time, Li Tianlan could only rely on his fists and feet. Even because of the loss of power, he was not even as good as an ordinary master who had not yet entered the 4 realms of martial arts. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu could barely be said to be the peak power of the young generation in the dark world. But it was almost impossible for this kind of power to kill hundreds of elites in a short time, including several fire-flaming realm experts and experts who were infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm. In 2 days they could get rid of the snipers here, and it would be best if they could seriously injure Nani Xiao. That was the limit. And this was just point 1. Point 1 was named by Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. It was located in the mountain forest in the south of Changdao. Point 2 was in the east. According to Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu's plan, it would also take 2 days to get there. Point 3 was the trickiest. It was located in the west of Changdao. It could be said to be the most heavily guarded place in East Island. Several thunder-shocking realm experts were all in that direction. And most of the small groups that were being chased in Zhongzhou state would enter Changdao from that direction. More than 10 defense points were all in the west of Changdao. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu hadn't confirmed which defense point was point 3. But they had left the most time for point 3. 3 whole days passed. As for point 4, there was no point 4. 3 points 1 week. The elites of Zhongzhou state would definitely break into Changdao within a week. As for those who didn't come after a week, there was basically no hope. The surrounding trees were left behind, and the pursuers were getting further and further away. Li Tianlan kept moving forward with a serious look on his face. His dressing had changed a lot. A dark gray night suit almost covered his whole body. What was even weirder was that he wore a pair of sunglasses that could almost cover half of his face on the bridge of his nose. In the night, the sunglasses kept flashing, reflecting everything around him to Li Tianlan's sight. This was a pair of sunglasses with many functions: ranging, reconnaissance, positioning, navigation, thermal imaging, signal jamming, and to a certain extent, it even had a certain bulletproof function. In an unfamiliar environment, these were undoubtedly the most practical things, especially the thermal imaging and ranging functions. Looking for a sniper with this thing was like catching a firefly in the middle of the night. Every time he caught one, he would be able to catch one. Gray clothes, sunglasses, silver sword, silver spear. Li Tianlan finally took off all the camouflage for the sky attack. For tonight's action, he carried the sky attack that the Dongqing clan gave him on his back, with 2 bullets in it. 2 bullets. It didn't sound like much, but when Thunder God gave the sky attack to Li Tianlan, there were no more than 20 bullets in it. During the days when he was chased by my Shiranui, Li Tianlan had used up 5 bullets. At close range, the power of the sky attack combined with this special bullet was simply unparalleled. Li Tianlan shot 5 times and 3 times he missed. But the 2 Thundershocking Realm experts he hit died on the spot without exception. The Holy Thunder of East Island was a killing weapon, but compared with the sky attack, it was nothing. I've gotten rid of them. In the darkness, Jiang Shangyu's voice rang out. How about you? He killed fewer people than Li Tianlan, which meant that he didn't go deep into the forest as Li Tianlan did, so it was naturally less difficult for him to retreat. I'm almost there. Li Tianlan said calmly. Let's meet at the predetermined place. The second raid will be carried out in 2 hours. You're too slow, and they're getting more and more vigilant. If you still don't show your real skills in the next action, our results will be worse than now. Jiang Shangyu chuckled and said nothing. Bang! Li Tianlan wanted to say something more, but a fierce and loud gunshot suddenly rang in his ears. In an instant, Li Tianlan didn't even have time to think. He almost instinctively changed his position with the shadow. Because the shadow appeared too quickly, it only appeared less than 5 meters behind him, but it was enough to make the opponent's shot completely miss. Li Tianlan's cold eyes swept slightly. 100 meters ahead, a red blurry figure directly appeared on the lens of his sunglasses. The opponent missed the shot, jumped up from the hiding place, turned around and ran. Li Tianlan sneered. Without hesitation, he directly chased after him. Extreme sprint. The distance between the 2 sides was instantly shortened. The strength of the sniper in front of him was obviously not comparable to that of an ordinary sniper. He could be said to be the elite of the elites, and his speed was close to that of a fire-flaming realm expert. But as Li Tianlan's speed got faster and faster, he became more and more nervous and looked back from time to time. 50 meters. 30 meters. 20 meters. The distance between the 2 sides was getting closer and closer. There was a flash of killing intent in Li Tianlan's eyes, and a shadow directly appeared in front of the sniper. He raised the long sword in his hand. The moment the sword light lit up, what appeared in front of Li Tianlan was a face without any panic or fear. The sniper's eyes were unusually calm, but his expression was full of ferocity and cruelty. The sword light fell. The sniper raised his arm at the same time. One punch. Boom. In the raging killing intent. In an instant, there was lightning rising in the whole forest, shining and glaring. Chapter 170. There was no sign. The feeling of fatal danger came suddenly. For Li Tianlan, he just wanted to get rid of a sniper lying in ambush on the periphery. Once there was serious chaos in the defense point led by Nani Xiao. This point would become the best breakthrough point for Zhongzhou State elites to break into Changdao from this direction. Nani Xiao and the sniper here were the most important targets for Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. The former was strong enough to crush most of the elites sneaking into East Island at his peak, and the power of the latter's long-range shooting could not be ignored. If the ordinary elites lying in ambush in the jungle could only chase the elite soldiers of Zhongzhou State, then the sniper and Nani Xiao could kill the people of Zhongzhou State. This was the advantage of strength and firepower. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu were almost unafraid of most of the thunder-shocking realm experts when they joined forces. But in the face of Nani Xiao, they didn't even have the confidence to seriously injure him. That was why they paid special attention to the action of eliminating these snipers. Now on the way back, Li Tianlan found a fish that they hadn't found before. What reason did he have not to take action? So Li Tianlan didn't think much at all. In the face of the sniper's escape, he took action as fast as he could, and the first move was a killing move. For a man like him who was almost invincible in close combat, a sniper in close combat was a nonentity. In the air, the thunderous gunshots swept through the forest. Before the gunshots died down, the shining lightning had suddenly enveloped the nearby forest. Within a radius of more than 10 meters, more than a dozen trees were directly turned into a pile of charcoal at the moment the lightning lit up. The fleeing sniper was wrapped in lightning. He sneered, and the lightning around him formed a big net in the air, directly shrouding Li Tianlan. Boom! In the clear and strange roar, the lightning crisscrossed, and everything around it became blurred. There was only light, dazzling light. The ant in his mind suddenly turned into a dormant tiger. In the vast expanse of light, Li Tianlan could almost clearly smell the smell of death. In a hurry, Li Tianlan just took a step back instinctively. His whole body tightened, and a large ice wall nearly 5 meters thick wrapped around him. Countless flames were brewing inside the ice wall. Ice and fire intertwined. It exuded a kind of cold and almost violent heat. Lightning flashed. The ice wall, which was more than 5 meters thick, completely collapsed at the first moment. The fire inside the ice wall roared and surged out, but it was directly obliterated in a large area of lightning. The broken ice layer flew out. Li Tianlan's figure swayed slightly. At the moment when the lightning was about to envelop his body, his figure had already appeared on a piece of broken ice more than 10 meters away. Desperate chase, shadow symbol formula, night walking. In terms of explosive force alone, the unique skills of the Li family might be a little worse than those of the Wang family of Beihai. But in terms of flexibility and speed, the unique skills of the Li family were truly superior. In this respect, neither the Wang family of Beihai nor Kunlun City could compare with them. No one could imagine how flexible Li Tianlan, who had all the body movements in the map of God of War, could be without seeing it with their own eyes. The lightning shot forward in a straight line, and countless flames and ice shards disappeared in the blinding light. The thunder-shocking realm expert disguised as an ordinary sniper grinned hideously. He stared at Li Tianlan, who was more than 10 meters away, and sneered. How many times can you hide? He moved his body casually and strode forward. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed tightly, and there was no emotion on his face. His eyes were fixed on the thunder-shocking realm expert in front of him. Although he had guessed it in his heart, he still couldn't believe it. Who are you? He paused and said in a cold tone. Nani Xiao of Benzhou. The moment the lightning flashed again, Nani Xiao's striding figure suddenly accelerated and took off. His figure rushed into the air more than 10 meters away. Like a big bird, he swooped down on Li Tianlan with all his strength. In the lightning, Li Tianlan had time to observe the face of the East Island Special Warfare Giant for the first time. Nani Xiao was not tall, about 1.7 meters tall, which was in line with the standard of East Island men, but his body was extremely strong. His ferocious-looking face looked a little pale in the lightning, but it added a little evil. Extremely bright light kept blooming around him, which was an almost irresistible force. Who would have thought that Nani Xiao, one of the giants of the special warfare system of East Island, would ambush a young man here regardless of his identity? At such a close distance, even if Li Tianlan's body movement was unparalleled in the world, there was almost no hope of escape when there was a gap of nearly 2 realms. The distance of more than 10 meters was shortened in an instant. Nani Xiao rubbed in the air, and the air whistled and twisted at the extreme speed. Flashes of lightning burst out all over him. The lightning spread rapidly toward his arms. The 2 sides were less than 5 meters apart. Nani Xiao's arms shook, and all the lightning suddenly gathered on his arms. The lightning burst out, and the light extended in his hands. As he waved his arms, before Nani Xiao's body could get close to Li Tianlan, Two dazzling and dangerous bolts of lightning had already struck Li Tianlan's head. Fierce, swift, and ruthless. It all happened in a second. Li Tianlan only had time to condense a shadow not far away from him. Two parallel flashes of lightning had already crisscrossed between Nani Xiu's hands. The light flashed in the air, and wherever it passed, the air was completely torn apart. The two flashes of lightning crisscrossed and fell. The ghastly and terrible killing intent rose and fell in the mountain forest. Li Tianlan turned slightly, and had already switched places with the shadow 20 meters away. Nani Xiu's body was still in the air. Li Tianlan raised his palm slightly. Two flashes of lightning passed through the shadow of nothingness, and fell to the ground with a crash. In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, everything in the mountain forest seemed to be strangely still for a moment. Fallen leaves, raindrops, crushed ice, and flames suddenly stopped. In less than half a second, the lightning that landed on the ground suddenly began to expand amidst a violent roar. A large amount of lightning shot up into the sky, and there were also lightning that flowed and spread on the ground like water. All the stillness disappeared completely, like a painting that was violently torn apart. The trees and the ground within a radius of more than 50 meters shook violently in the surging lightning. The broken trees and turf flew up along with the soil. The sharp light enveloped everything in the vicinity. And then it was the most barbaric destruction. Nani Xiu was in the air. His body was completely wrapped in lightning. Like a flash of lightning, he rushed toward Li Tianlan without a pause. The rain had completely disappeared, leaving only the lightning raging in the mountain forest. Switch places. Switch places. Switch places again. Three shadows almost lined up in a straight line behind Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's figure kept flashing, and in the blink of an eye, he moved back nearly 100 meters, but he could not get out of Nani Xiu's attack range. There was a gap of nearly 2 realms between them, and the gap in strength was enough to make up for the lack of body movements. Nani Xiu's body in the air had almost become a ball of light full of lightning. Wherever the ball of light passed, there was a continuous burst. The two of them, one advancing and the other retreating, almost instantly opened up a flat path of 100 meters in the mountain forest. Li Tianlan stopped abruptly. In the face of his almost irresistible power, he stopped. An ice wall with a thickness of more than 10 meters suddenly appeared around him. The moment the ice wall appeared, Nani Xiu in the lightning vaguely saw the silver human emperor turn into a long sword. The young heavenly son from Zhongzhou state clenched the hilt of the sword, and raised his eyebrows slightly. He still looked to be in a sorry state, but under the illumination of the lightning, his eyes suddenly became fierce. It was an indescribable temperament, and there seemed to be a kind of arrogance and domineering aura that seemed to look down on the world. The ice wall was completely formed. Their line of sight was separated. Between heaven and earth, a vast and crazy sword intent that was almost boundless and empty suddenly rose up in the lightning. Nani Xiu sneered. Although his strength was higher than Li Tianlan's, the latter's body movement was absolutely exquisite. If one chased and the other fled, Li Tianlan estimated that he could survive for a long time. But the other stopped to fight desperately, which was simply courting death. The lightning shrouding him within dozens of meters kept moving forward. Nani Xiu gave a long roar, and the lightning directly condensed into a huge blade surrounded by light with him as the center. The blade hung over Nani Xiu's head. The light was bright, like a blue cold moon shining with pale light. Facing the ice wall more than 10 meters thick, Nani Xiu, with a cold expression, suddenly swung down with one hand. The blade, like a cold moon, surging with endless lightning, cut through the air and slammed hard on the thick ice wall in front of him. Boom! For a moment, the whole forest seemed to shake violently. The lightning, which was condensed to the extreme, cut through the ice wall without any hindrance, and the broken ice flew high into the sky. Almost at the same time, Li Tianlan's fierce and crazy voice rang out. Stop! The air raged by the lightning twisted violently, and even the ice flying in the air stopped abruptly. Only the blade surrounded by lightning still moved forward, but it slowed down for a moment. But a moment was enough for Li Tianlan. Under the sharp light of the lightning, Li Tianlan took a step forward, and his body suddenly became illusory. The blade condensed by lightning cut through Li Tianlan's shadow, But his real body with the sword had already arrived in front of Nani Xiao. Along with his real body, there were two other shadows that looked exactly like him. Li Tianlan's shadow formula was far less flexible than Tribulation's. Now he could only condense 3 shadows. But to be exact, the third shadow could only change positions and had no attack power at all. 3 shadows plus his real body could fool around with his opponent unscrupulously when facing a well-matched opponent. But when facing an expert like Nani Xiao, who was much stronger than him, it was the safest way to leave the shadow that could only change positions in the distance. 1 step. Li Tianlan came to Nani Xiao almost in 1 step, dozens of meters away. The Buddhist incantation of 9 words, the flash formula. In Tribulation's Buddhist incantation of 9 words, the shadow formula was the most flexible body movement, the crack formula was the strongest explosion, and the flash formula was the fastest speed. The dried-up rain fell again in the night, gently beating on the forest. On the open space in the forest flattened by the lightning, Li Tianlan's eyes were unprecedentedly focused and sharp. At the same time that the layer of ice shattered, his aura began to skyrocket at an astonishing speed. The stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. The peak of the fire-flaming realm. It continued to rise. As Nani Xiao's pupils shrank instinctively, Li Tianlan raised his long sword and stabbed it straight into the sky. Boom! A dull roar in the air flashed and died away. The rain falling around them was directly shattered by the violent sword energy. The 2 shadows followed Li Tianlan and raised their swords at the same time. Li Tianlan's face was pale. His rising aura almost fell to its lowest point in an instant. But the bright sword light pierced the night, shining fiercely and violently in the dark forest. The majestic and vast sword intent rose out of thin air, as if covering the sky. The rain falling from the sky did not fall for a moment, but all rolled back into the air. The killing intent in the forest converged. Only the sword light fell from the sky with the majestic and ethereal sword intent. The temperature in the air became extremely hot, and there seemed to be a dim yellow light in the darkness. Then the light faded. In the vast world, the sword light shone above. The sky within a radius of nearly 100 meters seemed to shine with an extremely dazzling and blurred color under this sword. The sword intent was like fire, and its momentum was like thunder. At this second, Li Tianlan's aura was weak, but his solemn figure holding the sword was truly peerless, with a kind of demeanor that could overturn everything. The demeanor of a sword. There was only sword light above. But Li Tianlan became a sword. The strongest sword. This sword had completely surpassed the fire-flaming realm, but it was still a step away from the thunder-shocking realm. Forcibly restoring his strength beyond the fire-flaming realm, without touching the thunder-shocking realm was Li Tianlan's most powerful sword move without damaging his foundation. All the power. All the sword intent. And all the outbreak. His indifferent voice filled the air, weak, but with a high majesty. Break. He held the long sword in his hand tightly, and without any hesitation, he slashed hard at Nani Xiao. The 2 shadows beside him also slashed down at the same time. You're tuning into the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.